So, well, the structure of the progression will be similar to last time, as in we'll take what's first first and second second. So the direction for some of my questions that I wanted to pose to all of you and hear your thoughts about will be first Kierkegaard, then Heidegger. But we don't have to restrict ourselves from going back and forth. It's just that the questions that I have uh, extracted from the experience of reading will be in that order. But yeah, there's no reason why if you have something on your mind that is about Heidegger while we're talking about Kierkegaard or vice versa, then or Freud or whoever. Um, a good another um then by all means please hello Ephraim, by all means just uh just go ahead and but before we do that, before I get to asking about the Kierkegaard, I wanted to say something kind of somewhat somewhat I wanted to do somewhat of a recapitulation, but not really a repetition of what went on last time. It's more that I just kind of reread the Freud and some things popped out at me that I thought would be relevant to mention. Um, I think it is important to have as clear as possible in our mind why Freud says that he changes his view on the question of the locus of anxiety. This is in the inhibition symptoms anxiety. Um, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully I don't yeah, okay, hopefully this works. Can someone tell me if you see my screen? And
Yep.
it's yeah, okay.
Yeah, I see
Um,
it.
okay, good. Sorry, just going up, going up. Oh yeah. Um, okay. Is that actually what I wanted? Um, okay, I think well, I've lost it for now. But I guess what will become immediately important is this down here. But in essence, and if someone can find the bit where he says this explicitly, that'd be helpful, but not necessary. He says that at first, before analysis had gotten very long, had gotten very far in um, the theory of the libido, the theory of the ego, the psychodynamic model, which is one of those two, represented by one of those two pictures I sent in the chat. Freud had thought that, for example, when two individuals are having sex and they are interrupted, there is a surge of anxiety. Uh, I'm just taking one of the cases he mentions, a surge of anxiety, which he interprets to be a transformation of the libido. In this case, anxiety is an effect of repression. In the way, I mean, we talked kind of uh, around the way that phobia, the category of phobia, is invoked in our day. Something similar is going on there, where let's say that I Uh, uh, I say that I am afraid of public speaking or being before a crowd of other people or being around other people. If I go to a therapist, I'm likely to be told or at least led to the discovery that that fear is not the real one, that that fear is an effect of some kind of unconscious process behind which there is some more fundamental um, psychological position, even a real fear. There's much in that, as we mentioned last time, much in our intuitive sense of psychological realities that are overlap with Freud. So Freud simply does continue to live on in even the most vulgar psychologism. But what Freud's turn is that he refers to somewhere here very early on is that anxiety can't be um, an effect of repression, but needs to be, well, you see, he puts it here in the following way. The affect of anxiety, which was the essence of the phobia, came not from the process of repression, not from the libidinal cathexes of the repressed impulses, but from the repressing agency itself. And he refers, in connection to this, to these two cases, especially the little Hans case, which is a case of a boy who is afraid of being bitten by a horse and suffers a sequence of inhibitions in connection with that fear. He doesn't want to go outside, doesn't want to go around the horses, obviously, and so on and so on. In this case, but as well as in others, the anxiety that is identified in the formation of the symptom is not cannot be connected, at least in a straightforward way, in an inverse relation, for example, uh, to the libidinal attachments before the formation of the symptom. And it's here that the what's called the Oedipus complex, the complex of castration, um, is relevant and crucial to insert because you may not be able to read what I have written in the down below here, but I'll just represent it to you as it is appearing to me. The scheme that Freud has goes as follows. There is a structural ambiguity in the familial relation that Oedipus, as a structure, designates. It's sometimes represented as the child's jealousy of the power of an authority. Often it's the father's authority over the mother's desire, that the father is possesses the mother and the child does not. Um, that is partially true, at least in Freud's mind, and Lacan will emphasize the following point, which is that it's intuitive for adults like us, even young ones, to think of the parent as transcendent in relation to the child. But it is equally true that the child is transcendent in relation to the parent. The capacity of the child, the freedom of the child, the being of the child is as um, supersedes the measure, the valuative measures of the parent just as much as the other way around. So, and often to illustrate what that could mean or what that could look like, often children will say, uh, even to their parents, that they wish they had other parents, or that Timmy's mom lets him play Counter-Strike until 4 in the morning, but I can't. This is a challenge to an authority, but it's also a kind of experimental play with authority, a kind of mimicry, that the child is simply putting themselves in the position of the valuative decisions that are in reality monopolized by the parents that they are most proximate to. So there's jealousy. There's jealousy in the child in this familial dynamic, but it's a jealousy that is not fully psychologized in the sense that the child has some a priori wish, genital wish, to possess the mother as an object of sexual desire. That, of course, can and in some sense will happen. But in much of this text by Freud, there are several stages of libidinal organization that the human being from childhood onward has to pass through, the genital phase being one of several. So that's all to say, the most important part of this dynamic for the question here, which is where does anxiety really appear in the psychodynamic model that we are working with in the relation between the consciousness and unconsciousness. The familial dynamic sets up a kind of dramatic situation where a suspension of libido is very likely to occur. In the case of little Hans, Freud says, he is lands himself in a position of ambivalence. Ambivalence meaning he has an aggressive tendency directed at his father, as well as a positive one. And this, like other cases of ambivalence, is something like a dramatic suspension of action. There's a conflict, and there's no way to resolve the conflict except by what is called repression. Repression is not merely the burial of a feeling that is on its own intolerable or forbidden. Freud says, again, at some other point, that if little Hans's feeling were to be expressed in the form of an explicit aggression against his father, we would not talk about a symptom formation. It's because it becomes attached to a horse and to the fear of being bitten by a horse that we speak of the formation of a symptom. There's interesting questions associated with that assertion, but at least it's important to see that in this new conception of anxiety, anxiety is placed in this kind of suspended middle that is generated, subjectively generated by the Oedipal dynamic, and then repression occurs in order to resolve it. Um, Resolve in a qualified sense, because as he says later, again, we'll see. Uh, well, this is relevant. That the ego will form some kind of symbiotic relationship with its symptoms. This is especially true or especially obvious in obsessional neurosis, where the rituals, um, even phobias, anticipations, expectations of an obsessional neurotic are kinds of something like a consolation function like consolation to the ego, and the progress of the personality um, is kind of follows the general narrative of a tighter and tighter, more assimilated relationship of the symptom to the ego. The hysteric, Freud says, is or hysterias, at least some of the hysterias are cases in which anxiety may not even appear at all. this is especially true of what's called or what Freud calls the conversion hysteria, where some kind of let's see if we can find uh, mm, can I find it? Oh, earlier. Earlier. Yes. So these are some examples that Freud generates of conversion hysteria, where uh, some psychic conflict is converted into is a undergoes some kind of somatization, turns into a bodily an embodied symptom, a purely embodied symptom. And it will be found, Freud says, that the pains from which a patient suffers were present in the situation in which the repression occurred, uh, or that his hallucination was a perception at that time, at the when the repression occurred, or that his motor paralysis is a defense against an action which should have been performed in the traumatic situation, or that his contracture is usually a displacement of an intended innervation of the muscles in some other part of his body, or that his convulsions are the expression of an outburst of affect which has been withdrawn from the normal control of the ego. So in hysteria, you get this severance where the ego uh, absolves itself of accounting for the symptom, and obsessional neurosis is less fundamental than hysteria because obsessional neurosis is the pathologization of a management of the symptom. So whereas hysteria, it's hysteric symptom often is, again, this is all Freud, um, uh, converts the psychic reality into some kind of somatic disturbance, and then it kind of just parallels the ego um, without touching it. The obsessional turns this situation into a problem of some kind, and it's at that point that the superegoic function becomes very relevant for the symptom formation because the superego is the agent of management, symptom management. And it's also in the obsession erotic, however, that the ego struggle against the symptom, as he says, is visible, much more visible than in hysteria, and then especially in phobia, because it's in the phobia that the problem of anxiety, which Freud says is um, now located in the agency of repression, in the ego, not as some secondary effect, that it is an indication or a signal of the ego's um, compulsion to account for its symptom, to struggle with its symptom, to make sense of it. Uh, that dynamic is can be accessed by analysis in a more straightforward way, and especially in the phobia because it has been turned into some object, a horse, a wolf. Uh, Again, the animal phobias are particularly instructive for Freud, obviously, because it's an objectification, but also a personification, because the animal is a living being and has some, at least some kind of uh, something like a structure of personality in relation to the human being. Although clearly not the animal can't speak. That would be the decisive characteristic. And so that is
In
more or
terms
less.
of
Yeah,
in
please.
terms of the Heidegger that we're going to read today, for him, danger has where from, right? And while anxiety doesn't, the thing about animals is that they are the vectors. They're their own vector of where from, right? That they are responsible for. So language or non-language, not that is the way that they are some kind of logos that they decide when and where to arrive from.
So can I say something too?
Please.
Okay, I've had my hand up for a while, but I wanted to just see I wanted to see if you had noticed before saying anything. Um, so
Sorry.
I just want to register that I think that like okay, I'm trying to think of the best way to go into this. So I think that Julia Kristeva kind of just like mogs everybody else on this issue, and that Powers of Horror kind of provides a much better framework for understanding this specific problem that Mikaya just brought up. And if I could just like read like a short passage from chapter one that I think is eminently relevant on exactly this problem, I think that it'll kind of help to situate like I guess kind of the paradox of like this supposed absolute differentiation between fear and anxiety, which is the case for Heidegger, obviously, and that's the central part of his study of anxiety, phenomenological study of anxiety as an eminent, I forget exactly how he says it, it's an eminent disclosive, eminent disclosure of Dasein. But also for Lacan, who takes up the same theme in the anxiety seminar, what I think Kristeva is able to do specifically on phobia, she like focuses on phobia as the vector for
Mhm.
this. She shows that phobia actually kind of suspends that distinction between fear and anxiety because or it complicates it because the second chapter of Powers of Horror is all about sort of the function of fear and in relation to anxiety, but there are some very pregnant remarks in the first chapter that I think kind of destabilize the entire architecture that Heidegger puts together phenomenologically and that Lacan I think too uncritically tends to take up. So I'm just going to read this I'm going to read this one paragraph, I think, and sort of see how that contributes to the conversation. Um, so, facing the abject, and more specifically, phobia and the splitting of the ego, one might ask if those articulations of negativity germane to the unconscious, inherited by Freud from philosophy and psychology, have not become inoperative. The unconscious contents remain here excluded, but in strange fashion, not radically enough to allow for a secure differentiation between subject and object, and yet clearly enough for a defensive position to be established, one that implies a refusal, but also sublimating elaboration, as if the fundamental opposition were between I and other, or, in more archaic fashion, between inside and outside, as if such an opposition subsumed the one between conscious and unconscious, elaborated on the basis of neuroses. So basically, the more fundamental point, which connects to the entire first chapter of the book, is that she's essentially saying that there's a kind of phobia that undermines even the opposition of subject and object, and that kind of generates this position of sort of the abject as beyond that opposition, and a distinction between inside and outside is still sustained, but there isn't kind of this position of subjectivity that there is in kind of the constitution of a neurotic subject through the formation of an unconscious. I described the study of anxiety and being in time from Heidegger as a perfect example of sort of neurotic constitution of the subject, and the way that he's constantly making reference to like Dasein as being one's own, but then he's like also literally neurotically like has all these footnotes where it's like, oh, you know, it's belongs to you, and then it's like, but it's thrown. It's not egotistical. It's thrown. It's like that's a big other, right? That thrownness is like that, and so but then when he says that anxiety discloses Dasein as such, it discloses the thrownness of Dasein as such. This is what Lacan is bringing on in the anxiety seminar when he's saying that like he's basically situating Big Other in exactly this point that Heidegger situates Dasein, which at least opens it up to the entire Burrowman, not which also can bring you back to Hegel if you follow David Gray Carlson's Burrowman reading Hegel. But the basic point that I wanted to make is just that I think Heidegger is essentially ontologizing neurosis, and I think that if you look at the sort of Freud's kind of development here and study of this problem with phobia in relation to neurosis, in relation to anxiety, I think he's also kind of learning from these cases of phobia that what he had presupposed of the nature of the psyche based on cases of neurosis, and this is what Kristeva really emphasizes in Powers of Horror, sort of with the benefit of hindsight of both Freud's work and Lacan's work in 1980, that there is sort of this fundamental difference between kind of the abject position of a certain sort of phobia that actually undermines even the capacity of the subject to negate the alleged object of phobia. So for in this kind of case, phobia, what's actually happening is essentially that the subject is co-constituted with the experience of the phobia. So it ceases to be aware from. The phobia is kind of integrated into the very being of the subject, to the point that the subject is not even a subject anymore. The subject is just in a kind of state of abjection in which there's a sort of defensive positioning of inside and outside. But in a sense, the distinction of fear and anxiety breaks down because insofar as anxiety is not localized, but then locality itself becomes unfastened from itself and taken up into this undifferentiated differentiation that is occurring in the object space. What you basically have is a fear that is an anxiety and an anxiety that is a fear. And so it creates this kind of sort of contaminating commerce between this neurotic opposition that Heidegger sets up, that Lacan, I think, is de facto really just developing from the standpoint of the analysis of neurosis. Also because he's not, I mean, Lacan always sort of struggled with like, how do you analyze psychosis or pervert? I mean, he said perverts can be analyzed, and kind of phobia is sort of ambiguously its own category. This is something that later Lacanians like Bruce Fink really struggle with. But Kristeva is a little bit more sanguine about the stuff. I mean, she even says in an essay, I think written shortly after Powers of Horror, that analysts should themselves become borderline, or should function like a borderline, in order to effectively analyze patients with different structures, with borderline kind of being sort of in the middle of the different structures. But yeah, that's all I wanted to contribute.
I have some thoughts, but if anyone wanted to go ahead before me, please do. I suppose I wanted to. What would be the best way to exchange the value?
Doesn't Lacan neuroticize everyone though? I mean, like, isn't that like what ontologizing neurosis is? Aren't we all neurotic anyway? Like, you know?
No. I mean, I don't think it's even true that Lacan really ontologizes. I mean, so the other thing is that Lacan argues against ontology as such, which is sort of his like ongoing struggle with Heidegger. And he for him, in the 20th seminar, Encore is sort of where he develops this most thoroughly, that for him, the equivalent to metaphysical substance, which is what he identifies really all ontology loops back around to, for and this is where Heidegger kind of fails in his sort of metaphysics, but anyway, for psychoanalysis, jouissance is the substance of the unconscious. And the difficulty with jouissance is that it's not necessarily neurotic. You can have the psychotic is in a state of jouissance. If anything, what neurosis is it's a defense against jouissance. So neurosis is already kind of super added onto the substance of the unconscious. It's a form of sort of the ordered regulation of the substance of the unconscious, which if you're kind of in it just completely, that's the state of psychosis, that kind of the jouissance that cannot be symbolized. That's state of psychosis.
It needs resistance to function.
Sorry, what?
It needs resistance.
Yeah,
to
exactly.
function.
So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so,
and the harder you resist, it's like a masochistic function, I think. Right.
So this is something that Deleuze really struggles with. I have a copy of his Coldness and Cruelty right here, which I've been perusing. I mean, I think Deleuze like has this issue where he's like, he at once kind of wants to quote unquote schizophrenize everything, but that impulse to schizophrenize actually seems more fundamentally related to this kind of valorization of masochism, which is expressed in Coldness and Cruelty. And that the really interesting thing about the difference between Deleuze and Lacan, which I think explodes into Anti-Oedipus, is that Lacan sees masochism and sadism as essentially interchangeable with each other, whereas Deleuze thinks that masochism is kind of this separate, meaningfully separate structure. And I think what he effectively does is he sort of uses masochism to try to explode the entire Lacanian framework and effectively normativizes the masochistic position, which I think it's also especially important to remember that Leopold von Sacher-Masoch was like a utopian feminist and had this whole kind of like attitude of like women have to be made to discipline men, and that this will liberate society from retrograde hierarchies, and that this is also like sexually exciting, which is very much what Deleuze is doing. I think. I mean, I think this is also carried forward by Nick Land. If you read like the first essay in Fanged Noumena, where he's like, we need to create new Amazons and stuff, and like why he was interested in Sadie Plant in the first place. It's very much this kind of like weird masochistic utopian feminism, which then I think Land becomes more homosexual over time, at least theoretically. That if you read like Xenosystems and the Dark Enlightenment, it's very much kind of like now he wants to be disciplined not by the Amazons but by the Hobbesian sovereign. I mean, especially the Dark Enlightenment is kind of this full transition into Peter Thiel style kind of homosexual masochism rather than the sort of Sacher-Masoch Deleuze style
the
when he was
soft
still
boy,
with
sad boy, femdom fantasy.
Exactly. Yeah, well, so right,
Yeah.
so Sacher-Masoch is the truth of Kierkegaard. This is a whole other thing. Is that it's like, and this is what Deleuze I think is also drawing out. So if you read like Difference in Repetition, the way that he sort of libidinalizes Kierkegaard, and
So sorry, I'm going to jump in. All of this is very relevant. I was just thinking of how to twist it in a way that's most faithful to the point on Kristeva. I will say, just as a small remark, maybe as a light, the sadism masochism stuff will come up in a major way in the anxiety seminar, which I'm excited about. His Lacan's discussion of it at least entails a separation, a qualitative separation between those two. I mean, against the psychological sense of an inverse relationship between sadism and masochism, and it has to do with finding sadism and masochism at different scales of the object cause of desire, which is mapped onto these Freudian phases, the sadistic dimension of orality, the gift, and anality, masochism. So he certainly does put them in a relation, which Deleuze probably would object to, but he is going at it in a way which would, I mean, they're two distinct forms of relation to the object as a portal to the other, which does, I mean, make sense, and I think intuitively that in either case, the other is being made to take on a different subjective attitude, and what is yielded from that is a different kind of position. But obviously, they are related.
So if I could just also add on to that. So yeah, okay. So what I was thinking of with that remark is that in Kant with Sade, that is where the earlier essay, that is where Lacan sort of mocks people who think that masochism and sadism are distinguishable, and kind of argues that they're inverted in an inverted relation to each other. Then I don't remember if I don't think it's in the anxiety seminar. I think it's somewhere else. Lacan actually reads Deleuze's book Coldness and Cruelty and praises it in one of his seminars.
I think that's with Sade and Kant, right? It's not even a seminar; it's a paper.
Yeah, well, no, right, but he doesn't say. So this is later on. So so Coldness and Cruelty came out after Kant with Sade, and then he read it, and then he praises it in one of his seminars. I think one of the unpublished ones, and says something along the lines of like that he wonders if Deleuze has been an analysis, and that it would be good for him to be an analysis or something, which is like very ominous. But Yeah, but so it does seem like Lacan actually is sort of um reciprocally influenced by Deleuze, but doesn't sort of fully take the Deleuze pill. So I'm not sure exactly about the timing of all of this, but it's possible that anxiety is sort of post Coldness and Cruelty, Lacan kind of repositioning his earlier sort of Kantian understanding of
I mean,
sadism.
yeah, in a very basic way, and I don't want to say too much about Lacan until we get to it, but in a very basic way, the formula Lacan comes up with is that the sadist identifies with the fetish object and tortures the other. The
So, like,
assumption,
Republicans identify with the state.
something like that, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, right.
and the masochist identifies with the common object, with the piece of
the
detritus.
the immigrant, the immigrant.
Sure, yeah, I mean, yeah, that works. That works. Um, and so you can see how they could be related on another plane, but and yeah, as Anna is saying, the relation between that masochism book is would be good to look into on these terms, and it is, I mean, it is a very automatic, um, it's a very objective reproduction of the structure of masochism, and but I guess the gambit is something like masochism without ritual, masochism as pure, masochism without tools, masochism as nomadic subjection to existence, or I guess whatever term he would prefer. Um, that I will have to push us into some questions about Kierkegaard, but we can of course keep talking about Heidegger and but the way that I wanted to, because I did want to respond to what Anna said earlier about Kristeva and that book, which is definitely relevant to all the stuff on the uncanny as well as the Freud on anxiety. And one of the pieces of that book that uh, clicked the last time I read it when I was teaching it was when she is talking about this in this I mean, yeah, what is an inversion between uh, Jewish Jewish purification and Christ's expulsion, i.e., when Christ says, "It's not what goes into your mouth that defiles you, but what comes out." And Kristeva has a lot. I mean, she makes the point that Anna read, which is that there is a the abject is something that is excluded from the neurotic phobia and is associated with the categories like disgust, um, with categories like disgust and impurity, where an object has been jettisoned and there's no capacity to manage it in the style of neurotic obsession. Um, and this discussion of the transition between these laws, these Jewish laws about forms of purification, um, which have to do with consumption, dietary habits, and et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure others of you would be able to speak on that more authoritatively. To this injunction, this reversal by Jesus that the source of defilement is in your heart, but also that the registration of the status of defilement is at the level of speech, what comes out of your mouth. Um, and in that, I mean, this is how, at least it appeared to me with Kristeva, it does her presentation does not prohibit the assumption that something had to go into your heart in order for it to be spoken out, and everyone can see that it defiles you.
Can I interject here? Sorry, you can keep going, but
Sure, yeah.
This is where I actually think Rene Girard mugs, and specifically I See Satan Fall Like Lightning, and the way that he develops the category of scandal. Because I think this is actually this is the missing piece for Kristeva. I don't think she has a sufficiently developed theory of scandal. And Girard is kind of more able to develop this theory because he's coming at it through this kind of theological anthropology. But I mean, in a sense, what the abject is that is different in principle from the neurotic phobia is that it is scandal. So the feature of scandal that Girard emphasizes as also kind of like the essence of sort of the satanic emergence within mimetic desire is that it both offends and fascinates, which is also what Kristeva is talking about with respect to the abject. So it's like, I mean, this very universal experience of like, you know, you see the train wreck and you like can't look away. And Girard even makes this really fascinating etymological argument that scandal is it comes from the word for stumbling block it's a Greek translation of the Hebrew word for stumbling block, and which how does he put it? It has this great passage about it, like when you are scandalized, it is as if you are or like you have a limp, so there's like it's sort of limps because like you're stumbling. It's like when you're scandalized, it's as if you're limping in such a way that you are constantly colliding with your own shadow, and that this kind of forms this I guess you could call it like a kind of gravitational cathexis within the knot of the psyche that I think is I mean with Lacan, he tends to frame this in terms of the real, but what I think is the value of Kristeva's intervention is that it's no longer articulated in terms of the real per se, because it's in a sense it's dehypostatized with Kristeva. Lacan has a tendency to like situate trauma in general as kind
Okay,
of
we're not talking about Lacan. You'll have to
okay,
make the point.
fine. Okay, so but the basic point is that objection I would link to as kind of a biblical concept scandal, which is it is already present in the Old Testament as kind of this sort of emergent theme that is distinct from the Mosaic law and the sort of purification, that then kind of becomes the central ethical structure of the New Testament in Girard's reading, which I think is convincing. And again, this is kind of what Kristeva like I mean the question of like what is it from outside that can get inside of you that can make what you say impure. For Girard, the answer for that is scandal, and I think that Kristeva doesn't have a answer the way that Girard does. And Girard also, this kind of comes from his Rousseauian kind of like again he has his own limit here, where it's like he sees the human as fundamentally pure and like corrupted by this sort of mimetic cycle of desire that emerges in imaginary rivalry with other people. Whereas Kristeva, I think, also kind of has a leg up on Girard insofar as she doesn't sort of fetishize natural human purity, and she's kind of capable of situating the abject as kind of more of a ineluctable position of sort of obligatory confrontation. Girard kind of has this fantasy of like if everybody sort of the if everybody just thing, if everybody just like listened to my prophecy, then we wouldn't have Satan anymore because I'm the Dostoevskian savior of anthropology. But anyway.
No, thank you. That is good. The scandal, and this will allow us to make the jump, and at least for the next hour or so, we'll keep it to the Kierkegaard and the Heidegger. But this category of scandal is deeply important, especially because Kierkegaard himself has taken the position of an actor on a stage. a persona, a mask, and he begins with the performance of being scandalized by this dogma of what is called the metahistoric fall of man, and it involves this doctrine of original sin. So the question I want to ask the group, any of you who haven't spoken yet, please do so. Why is, I mean, maybe a good question to begin with as a clarifying one. Why is this scandalous to him? Why is the notion that sin came into the world and into human beings, into the race of human beings with Adam, something that is problematic?
I mean, to a certain extent, I think he's, I mean, the specific paradox he sets up is like Adam is sort of like which came first, the act of sin or the state of sinfulness. Um, but to a certain extent, I think this isn't even tied to Adam specifically. I think this is, the problem of evil in general, because um, the, the very the very possibility that innocent Adam could have done something evil, is itself the problem. And so, and then, and the other thing he talks about is like, if you say that if you say that the first sin Adam committed is different in some way from the sins that all the rest of humans have committed from their sinful nature, then you're sort of like separating Adam out from the rest of the race, which becomes problematic because it's like, Adam is analogized to Christ. And so if Adam isn't actually typical of humanity, then Christ can't be either. And it creates this kind of theological paradox. But as I said, I think maybe the specific fall story isn't even the focus. I think it's just like he's just realizing there's kind of like a turtles all the way down thing with evil and the possibility of evil. And he talks at one point about how there's these kinds of like fanciful depictions of Adam. I think he's thinking of Paradise Lost or something, and how something like it becomes maybe like more scandalous with any depiction, but I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right on. And X says that he
Come
reached a
on.
common understanding of sinfulness as absconding from responsibility, making us spectators on sinfulness as if it is simply
What are you doing?
uh, as if it is simply uh, sort of absorbed from on the forefront of although that is a wonderful winter image. I'm
Yeah,
getting dizzy.
I know. Just like I was out here taking the dog out.
Very nice. Yes, as Jorge said, there's this placement outside of the race, but there's this kind of a double-edged sword because on the one hand, if we simply absorb sinfulness, if we acquire it by virtue of Adam's action, we're doing him a disservice as well as ourselves. We aren't thinking the emergence of sin at the level of the individual, and also not making Adam an individual by extension. And then X says also the qualitative leap of sin as an inviolable concept that isn't conditioned means it doesn't necessarily have to happen in history. So this is another question, but we can go back obviously if there's a desire.
Can I just interrogate? I
Go ahead.
haven't actually. This is about the Kierkegaard, right? I still haven't read it, but I mean, isn't this all just like historicizing Luther?
there's an echo. Say that again.
Isn't this all just essentially historicizing Luther specifically?
Is that a question or a statement?
It's a question. I mean, is it like, because it seems like this is just specifically, and I guess this connects. I didn't read that one either, but the Heidegger
Mm-hmm.
Luther's theory of sin. I mean, it just seems like it's like disconnected from the hamartiology that preceded the Reformation to me. It just seems like the whole discussion is just orbiting around the specifically Lutheran set of assumptions. But
Well, it's certainly. I think that is true. It's also Augustine that's at issue.
yeah, but it doesn't, I don't know. I mean, this is its own extremely complicated hermeneutical problem, but I don't think, I mean, I guess I just disagree with the Lutheran interpretation of Augustine. So it just kind of creates this. I mean, so like essentially, I do think that this is actually a psychoanalytic problem specifically because it's like the question of the relationship between original sin and concupiscence. It's like, is concupiscence, do you have total depravity as a result of original sin, or is it something that conditions concupiscence in such a way that it's not a total depravity, but it's a wound of sorts that has to be healed by Christ. So the kind of the Lutheran kind of break, which I think is a Manichean kind of retrogression on the mature Augustine, is essentially, I mean, because the issue between, and this is really where Kierkegaard I feel like is rebelling against Lutheranism in an important sense, if I'm understanding correctly, because it's like I mean, you know, Augustine was a Manichean, and the problem with them for him was precisely that they could not take responsibility for sin, because the Manichean claim, Gnostic claim, is that you're totally determined by your materiality. You cannot rebel against it. You cannot enter into a state of grace where you can obey God and you do not have to sin. You are in a flesh prison that forces you to sin. That's the Gnostic position. Whereas Augustine's entire development after his conversion to Christianity away from the Gnostics was to reject this view. The
Mhm.
bizarre thing to me about Lutheranism and the fact that it could even take hold at all is that it just seems transparently to be a Gnosticization of Augustine. It's just moving Augustine back to his pre-Christian standpoint, which is that your body is inherently sinful and it prevents you from having the freedom of the will to actually obey God's word, which is, I mean, Luther's bondage of the will is just such a bizarre document because it's like, it's just totally out of keeping with Augustine's own development and own ideas about the freedom of the will and the entire Christian tradition. If you look at, for example, even the Alexandrian context, where Gnosticism and Christianity were very much vying for, it was sort of before the formation of what we consider to be Orthodox conciliar Christianity in a meaningful sense. I mean, there were these controversies between the Valentinian Gnostics and other Gnostic sects and the proto-Orthodoxy associated with the catechetical school of Alexandria with Origen and Clement and so on. And it was the same debate. It was that the Gnostics all said, we're all deterministic, and they all said that you couldn't choose anything other than your own determined nature. Whereas the proto-Orthodox Christians refused this and insisted on the freedom of the will. And this is actually where Origen is on the Orthodox side. And Origen was first imported into the West in terms of struggling against this group called the Mathematicoi, who were essentially Gnostics, who also believed that everything was astrologically determined, and that as a result, there's no meaningfully sanctifying grace because everything proceeds in accordance with nature. But I guess the one more thing that I just want to say about Luther is that, yeah, I mean, it just seems like there's sort of this weird distortion field in theological literacy that is generated somehow and even of Augustine, because like, yes, there's all this controversy about the late Augustine and his conception of predestination, and does that kind of revive in Gnostic Necessitarianism? You see this problem reemerge with Jansen and Jansenism. I don't think it does, though. I think that you can have a coherent conception of predestination without that meaning there's a natural determination. And that's exactly the Valentinian issue. The Valentinians essentially said that there were three types of souls. They were all naturally determined, and that natural determination of the soul, the pneumatic, psychics, and hylics, was predestined by God. But the Augustinian position is precisely the opposite of this, because it's saying that there is predestination, but this predestination is supernatural. It's not the natural constitution of your soul itself, which is linked to your natural body, is predestined to be what it is as your natural determination, and the bondage of your will of that natural determination. It's sort of coming back towards you from your own finality in the future. That your predestination is not something that you have really any even analogical access to through any kind of natural analogy. In a weird sense, Luther, I think, is too analogical. He's caught in this sort of like position of a kind of natural analogy which is systematically disavowed, because he thinks that you can just negate nature. This is an erotic problem. He thinks that you can just negate nature, in a way that Hegel would call abstract, and somehow that gets you out of nature. But it just that's what nature is. It's its own negation. That's why you need a supernatural supplement to nature. And that's
so we have these kind of three Augustine standing in the background, and obviously and Luther as well, and that's his context. We have this category that everyone may or may not be familiar with, but was very important for Augustine. Augustine put himself in opposition to the Pelagians. I won't assume everyone has no idea, or I'll assume that everyone has some idea of what this means, but at the very least, what Kierkegaard finds problematic in the Pelagian position is that it begs the question about the relationship between the individual as woven in to the race, to the human species. And that problem is repeated by the Protestant church, according to Kierkegaard, who makes a distinction, or makes some kind of essential distinction between Adam and the rest of us, the sin of Adam and the sin of the rest of us. This is partially because, and this is the way that the Protestant moment legitimates itself against Catholicism, and this comes up in Heidegger's The Problem of Luther as well, or The Problem of Sin in Luther. Heidegger puts it very strongly, which is in the following way, that the Catholic position makes God responsible for sin. If we think of the punishment for sin as death, Heidegger says, on the contrary, we have to conceive of the punishment for sin as abandonment by God, because only then can we be made responsible for something that we ourselves have done, and the negative outcome of the action to sin is it's not an imperfection of creation, the fact that it is possible for us to die, but abandonment by God. And it is the Pelagian position, Kierkegaard is saying, and Heidegger is trying to echo this in some way, it seems, that the Pelagian position is basically that it is possible for the individual to correct what is an imperfection given to it by nature. The Pelagian makes this kind of super separation between its spiritual capacity and its natural capacity, and kind of operates on itself top down. But as we were saying, and this is why the Kristeva stuff is in fact relevant, very relevant, and some of the other things Anna was mentioning, that if we are we come to recognize that we are impure by virtue of what we say, even if we have no idea what we're saying. And this is a situation that Kierkegaard depicts with Adam, who does not understand what God is telling him. And so the question I'm about to ask everyone is, what is the relationship between innocence and anxiety? And the importance of that question is that we have these two views. This Pelagian, he also associated with, as you see, Socinian, philanthropic point of view. We don't have to define those, but those are also relevant. This view which says that innocence is in some way a function of the will, a function of the indifference of the will to the possibility of good and the possibility of evil. Then we have this other view, could be Augustinian, could be not Augustinian and Kierkegaardian, but at least another view, that innocence is an indication of something about which we can be guilty. And so there is this, is it a circle? I don't know, that would be a question. But he takes it very seriously, what is depicted in the Genesis story, which is that the possibility of sin precedes the actuality of sin. There must be some kind of intermediary term. That category, intermediary term, as you know from reading, comes up more than once, and it is what is being ignored, begged by his Christian context, an intermediary term between innocence and guilt, that is kind of where all of the drama is actually happening, but which and this will be my comment about Lutheranism or Protestantism as a moment, as a stream of thought. The gambit is that the typical, or at least the till then typical, motion of innocence to guilt in the story of man, Adam, to us, is reversed, where we are now in a kind of quantitatively a period, the present to the apocalyptic moment at the end of time, an infinitely diminishing magnitude, quantity of time in an interval which is closing very fast, infinitely fast. That's why, the Protestants, what they're known for, among other things, is constantly declaring the arrival of the end of time. That's the even, that the supercharging that capacity is one of the crucial features of American Christianity.
Luther was actually kind of good on this, though.
Luther
He's better.
himself, of course, was not a Protestant. That was his deal. Yeah, you're very right. He was
Okay,
not.
come on.
That's
Come
what he.
on.
We dodged the apocalypse, baby. We
No,
were not
so
about that.
I mean, to me it's like the essential thing here is that it's, I guess what distinguishes the Protestant for me is the supposition that the theology of the cross supersedes the obligation of actual obedience. So the idea that if the authority that you are meant to be obedient to fails to submit itself to the cross, therefore you do not have to be obedient to that authority. I'd say that that's the essential Protestant intuition, which Luther really introduces, and the entire apocalyptic fervor of American Protestant Christianity is essentially an extension of this basic intuition, which is that, even just the whole kind of exit structure, which is a Yarvin Land theme as well, is that this exit structure of like the American
Is that we
Revolution.
can know the unknowable.
It's not just about knowing the unknowable. It's about that's just in Paul, but the issue that I see and like the specific form of apocalypticism, it's a form of essentially the perpetual accusation against existing structures of human power that they have failed to crucify themselves, and that their failure to crucify themselves, it's essentially almost like a mimesis of the Old Testament prophets, where it's like it's sort of Luther is sort of doing a mimesis more of Isaiah than of Christ, and kind of effectively turning the clock back to before there was any conception of revelation, or of sort of God as being revealed in man. Because what happens now is that it's this perpetual prophetic temporality of like the apocalypse will come in the future, because what is the case now is that there's degeneracy all around, that's the consistent condition of the Old Testament prophets.
So this is why I don't know why you said come on, because the whole progression is, and this is what I mean by the reversal. It's the innocence of the church which the Protestant is apocalyptically driven on to. And so innocence, which was supposed to be at the beginning before the Reformation, is now posited at the end. And that is also recognized. That comes up in the Kierkegaard as well. Uh, and um, and it's something that is very different. I mean, the Catholic position is that it's the church's transparency about the absolute loss of innocence that makes it have spiritual monopoly. That's why it can have both swords, both the spiritual and the secular sword. Whereas the Protestant Church,
wait, but there's not an absolute loss of innocence. That's the whole claim in the Catholic martyrology. That's different from Luther's claim.
Is it
absolute depravity is not the same thing as the absolute loss of innocence. What the absolute loss of innocence entails is that no church could make the claim that it is the invisible one, but that is exactly what the Protestant says. The absolute depravity axiom is the sort of practical condition or postulate for absolution at the end of time, that the invisible church will be the one to inaugurate the apocalypse, that's true of the Shakers. I mean, all of these kind of, but that's not the same thing as loss of innocence, which the Catholic is more
okay. But
honest about.
My question here is, what about the Franciscans? Because, or even the holy orders in general, which largely came up in response to the Cathars, I think were effectively invisibilizing the Catholic Church already. In particular, I think this is sort of what the Franciscans did, that kind of complicated papal authority, which reaches its apogee with Occam.
The difference is that a Protestant minister, can pretend to be like Solomon or David, i.e., have a personal and political relationship with
to be
God.
absolute?
Yeah,
John picked.
but
no nature, just spirit. I have complete control of the world. I know where things are going, and you gotta trust me, buddy.
Yeah, but that's not Francis. St. Francis is very clear that that's not what he's saying. And anyone who wants to read him,
that's how Protestants act.
Yeah, no, I'm agreeing.
I know.
Yes. But compare that to the Franciscan tradition. They are, I mean, why there can be an order, the notion of an order, ecclesiastical order in Catholicism at all, is because that's not possible for them to say. So that would be the difference.
So this is what I see as being the Pelagian drift of Latter-day Protestantism. That really kind of starts with the elements of the Radical Reformation. The main person who kind of formalizes it is Arminius. And the kind of like radical claim of authoritative connection to God. I mean, in a sense, that is what, I mean, to say that Luther isn't Protestant is to say that Protestantism is Pelagian rather than Augustinian, in a sense, because I think that there's this great article I was reading a little bit ago about how American Christianity is essentially, at the very least, semi-Pelagian. The idea of grace that is presupposed with American liberalism is Pelagian. This is also Eric Nelson's whole argument in the Theology of Liberalism, that liberalism is a Pelagian political theology. And he traces this through essentially every single formative thinker of the liberal tradition, that it's derived ultimately from a series of theological disputes in England after the English Civil War, where basically all of the thinkers that we associate with English liberalism were associated with the Pelagianizing side that was sort of following the Arminian critique of Calvin from Jacob Arminius, including Hobbes, Locke, all of them. So in this respect, though, I don't think that it's, I mean, I think that the Augustinians are still Protestant. I mean, is Karl Barth not Protestant? Like, his whole thing is to be neo-Orthodox.
When I say Luther is not a Protestant, I mean, he did not identify with the people who carried his ideas forward. I'm not saying he's not a hypocrite. That's what I mean. So he didn't engage in this apocalyptic disturbance, like Thomas Munzer. That doesn't mean that what he said or his ideas were not consistent with those. I mean, clearly Munzer thought so. That's
Right.
what I mean.
Well, so, but I don't think it necessarily is the case that I'm not sure how to put this exactly, but okay, if you look at somebody like Barth, who is trying very hard to be totally orthodox Calvinist, the presupposition there's still this apocalyptic prophetic rhetoric, but it's like this kind of apocalypse outside of time. And that's really the big difference, I think, between Luther and Münzer, is that for Luther, it's like the cross is, it's like what Hegel formalizes as the speculative Good Friday. To not, like, you can't kind of enact the apocalypse through human agency, which would be Pelagian. And that's exactly kind of what Luther is criticizing in the Catholic Church, is that he thinks that there's, especially this Renaissance Catholicism, like the indulgences were being raised in order to fund, I believe it was St. Peter's Basilica. And the whole kind of Renaissance project, which was extremely lavish and sort of very much like inversion of the Franciscan values. Luther is, and even the values of Augustinian values and so on. Luther is kind of the conscience of the church, who, instead of sort of stopping himself at the point of the internal autoimmune processes to regulate the dispute, kind of pushes forward and makes this decision about the absolute requirement of the theology of the cross. And this is what seems to kind of generate, against his own preferences, this inevitable process where, because most people are not capable of holding to the theology of the cross, which is essentially what Luther is taking issue with in the Catholic Church, exactly the problem of whatever concupiscence, desire, and so on that he's identifying among Catholics takes hold among Protestants, and this is what generates liberal Protestantism. And so then you can read someone like Barth, and his rebellion against liberal Protestantism is basically this sort of tragic struggle, where in some sense it's kind of like your capacity to engage in this exercise of church dogmatics is your capacity to sort of hold back the tide of total depravity that affects both Catholic and Protestant communities. And only very few people are even capable of registering it as an issue. And that's, I think, part of why Barth was such an explosive figure for 20th century theology among Catholics as well, is that he kind of actually just took the ideas seriously after a few centuries of kind of like, trying in various different ways to supersede what the reformers actually said within the Protestant world, and kind of unfastening the premises of the Reformation from societies that had been reformed, so to speak.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
Why am I?
Yeah, I don't know what's happening with you. Anyway, so this brings us all back to Jorge. Jorge, Kierkegaardian that you are.
Yeah.
I feel like the thread I did about you is sort of circling around everything we're talking about. So I'm going to bring it up. What I think is like the collapse in mediation is what happened with the church, whatever, going, kaboom, after Luther did his thing. So then you have Protestantism, which, I think of more as Calvinism, I would say. And I like to think of it as the libidinal economy takes over. The libidinal economy of damnation takes over. The urge to scapegoat, whatever, takes over and becomes the primary, uh, I would say, force for conversion in post-Reformation Christianity. So that's how we get the Puritans and whatever. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I don't know where you're going with this, though, I would say.
Trust me, I'm going somewhere, buddy.
Okay.
The tragedy of Christianity is that it reveals divine love for all creatures, but you can't appreciate beautiful women. The tragedy of Islam is that you can appreciate mathematical precision of the divine, but can't experience dizziness of wine. Okay, so Jorge, I kind of get what you're saying right here, because it's like you're like saying like fallenness. Whenever we like desire, we have a sin or whatever.
Built into every, like, I'm saying there's this kind of like, everything is built
Absolute
on.
depravity. Absolute depravity is sort of like where I'm getting right.
I don't think that's quite what I'm saying, though, because I don't think the.
I'm going to assume on your behalf, as your priest, that that is what you mean. You mean absolute depravity. You just don't have the words to express it
I
here.
would prefer if you did not assume what I meant, though. Do you see what I'm saying?
This is mediation. This is mediation. This is mediation.
Well, I have a question for Jorge. Maybe it'll allow you to address this issue in relation
Yeah.
to I don't. He doesn't say very much about it, but he does say that with sinfulness, sexuality is posited, and that has to do with the fact that anxiety is the presupposition of hereditary sin, which obviously requires generation. So something about the issue of anxiety has to do with um,
The old
well,
Adam.
in order to think of sinfulness as a presupposition of any kind, it
comes
has to
down
be
to us.
inherited. It has to be a product of generation. But of course, Adam was not generated like we are.
I
So, I mean, I get maybe in a very vulgar way, this idea that sexuality is posited with in this moment of the temptation. Is it really commensurable, or how could it be commensurable with the quote unquote normal structure of sexual temptation?
So you're asking, like, what's the relation between this initial cut that introduces sexuality with what's the relation between that and like what we understand as sexual temptation in the kind of like in between time and between redemption?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I feel like I would say they're probably very different because I feel like the structure of sexuality is like determined by it's like a loop of like mimicry and stuff. I mean, this is I guess it's the Oedipus complex ultimately, and so I would say that this is taking place in a very different. Um, this is like a very the event of the fall is very much in the realm of like what I think Freud called like polymorphous perversity or whatever, where it's like before it's been controlled by the Oedipus complex, which I feel like is not, the experience that you get after that. Um,
By that you mean it's Adam trying to be like God?
yeah, instead of trying to be like the father or something.
Mm-hmm.
Which is like God.
Um, well, but I feel like because like a key part of the like Freud's writings on anxiety is the whole thing about um ambivalence where maybe like you're a son being kind of swept into the Oedipal triangle, and so your desire is being configured as simultaneously like you simultaneously, like and admire the father in one aspect and wish the father ill in another aspect, which includes like kind of like this revelation of the father's potential weakness or something. But then I feel like that wouldn't be the case with imitating God. But now that I'm saying it, I'm realizing that in the fall narrative, there's the whole deal about the serpent saying that the uh
Let's not forget who ate.
right.
I mean,
That's right. But
He
the
says
serpent,
something, Kierkegaard says something very interesting when he starts to talk about Genesis, the myth, and he refers to the serpent, and he says that he's going to freely admit his inability to connect any definite thought with the serpent. Maybe I'll put this up. Uh, he says that this would be page 48. Um, he says that the serpent's assault upon man is also, where is this? Okay, 40, 40. The serpent's assault upon man is also an indirect temptation of God, since it interferes in the relation between God and man. And one is confronted by the third statement that every man is tempted by himself. That's from James, which Kierkegaard mentions. Um, it appears a little intuitive to me, but maybe just a question is why would that be the case? Why would it be the case that it would be an indirect temptation of God?
well, because I mean, in the Christian context, this is because the incarnation is, on some level beyond time and already posited and so on. So God is already God man. So this ties in with the kind of divinization, theosis arc. Um, but yeah, and then yeah, so it's like the serpent is tempting God, and then the humans are trying to imitate God. So that's an interesting parallel. And then also the serpent is undermining God by saying, like, has God really promised this? That kind of thing. So um, there is actually an analogy with sort of like the realization of the weakness of the father in that.
Right, right. And at least in the Protestant tradition, where the Old Testament is reread along certain lines, the accuser in the Job story is sometimes read as being Satan, which in the Old Testament is the accuser is just one of the angels. Um, yeah, in the Old Testament, the accuser is simply one of the angels, but
I didn't know this. I thought it
it
was Satan.
well, that
I didn't.
is
I
what
mean, I
is
was
read
raised.
into it. Sure, depending on, the accuser is the one who says, God, I bet if you ruined his life, he would not believe, or he would lose faith. And in that, if the accuser is interpreted as Satan, then that could be something like an indirect temptation of God. Although, it doesn't need to be one, it doesn't need to be one that makes God fall necessarily, but it is an attempt to tempt.
No, I remember having this conversation like with teachers in Sunday school. I was like, that's kind of shitty. Kind of
Mhm.
shit. What he did. It's kind of shitty what God did today. Be like, I bet we can push him to the brink. I bet we can push him to the brink.
Mhm.
You know? So yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah.
I've heard people put that before, whatever, with Faust or whatever. You know.
Hmm.
Can I just say something briefly? Um, Personally, and I'll probably tune out after saying this, and I just kind of want to provide it like a Lacanian scansion for the audience. Is I think the central issue with the effect of Luther's paradoxicalist theological epistemology that Kierkegaard completely adopts as his own, while still hystericizing all of its other premises, is that there's a dissolution. This is relevant to the cleverness thing that it's just there on the screen. This is complete dissolution of any possibility of an initiatory hierarchy of gnosis. So instead of there being like some people actually are above other people and initiate other people in the process of discovering the truth, what Luther is essentially doing by totalizing depravity is denying this hierarchy, rejecting Dionysius the Areopagite, and basically sending everyone into this abyss of paradox. So the consequence of this, though, is that insofar as anyone actually tries to improve their own position, you get the same kind of Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, Marx, Hegel, all of those sorts of like agonies are consequences of this Lutheran gesture of like no more initiatory hierarchy. It's just paradox all the way down, and you just have to be like compulsively crucifying yourself, which is itself, I think, a weird kind of, in many ways, more radical sadism than any kind of initiation can be, because it's completely unbounded. There's not a structure that's provided for kind of the initiatory tensions, but it's there's really just no space in which it can hold. It's sort of just spinning out in an indefinite process, which inevitably reproduces Gnosticism, because Gnosticism is the process whereby that indefinite extension is reinteriorized in some kind of internal thetic authority that is dissociated from the social body. Or that's kind of what O'Regan argues in Gnostic Return and Modernity. But all right, that's my piece.
Yeah. Yeah, there is certainly a I mean, you kind of have two paths from the Protestant moment, either this total dissolution of ecclesiastical authority or ecclesiastical pathways, or a kind of interiorization of it. And the difference, or the stability of the difference, is certainly not at all clear. What is being trotted out by identifying the concept of anxiety is something like the structure of initiation into guilt, but it's certainly, I mean, it's certainly not it's not at the level of a systematic political theory. Um, and so you have a bit of an aporia. I guess I will say, maybe just as a small kind of like large, like, general scope remark on the Kierkegaard's point of view. The point of either or, to just put it very simply, which again, if you're not familiar, is this book he writes, where one half of it is a character who is living what's called the aesthetic life, and then the other is the ethical life, and the two shall not meet. It's I mean, both of them aren't good. Both of them, they're not. It's not supposed to be a decision. If anything, I mean, but again, one will take or leave what I'm saying here. It was a book written in response to what, again, we may or may not know is Kierkegaard's famous abandonment of his fiancée, where he suddenly, they were arranged to be married, or they had planned to be married, and then he calls it off at the last moment, and then he writes Either Or, in which he says it's impossible to marry, it's impossible not to marry, you'll regret it either way. That he puts in the mouth of the first speaker, the uh, aesthetic, and both of them kind of vocalize paradoxes that they feel their own one-sided position puts them in, but without any possibility of escape or exit. And then this book is dedicated to her. Obviously, much more can be said, and all of the details are in a way being left out. But Kierkegaard is a very sad figure because I read that gesture as a cry for help. Um, as a cry for help, which is just putting the problem over to her. I mean, basically, the challenge, I mean, once you do that to somebody, is whether or not they will be brave enough to push past your symptom or work through it for you, meet you on terms, um, meet you on terms. And the problem is obviously it's not meeting you on your own terms because your own terms are contradictory. That's what makes being in love, or one of the things that makes being in love difficult. Um, and no, his fiance was not Clara. I see the point. Well, I think he was more involved in the relationship than Nathaniel was with Clara. As in, there did not seem to be a bitterness or resentment at her. It's more of a helplessness that she, uh, if anything, it seems like the opposite case, as in the Sandman, because in the Sandman, Clara doesn't believe him. Um, and leaves him to him, kind of is trying to pull him back to reality. But in the Kierkegaard Regina situation, Regina is highly respectful of his spirit, of his kind of orchestrated system of decisions. Um, and so she doesn't rise to the occasion of disturbing his act, and then his act ends up, leaving him in this mode of abandonment, after which he is just continually propagating these masks. And this anxiety concept is a privileged one for him because it is an indication of something like, to use Anna's category, Anna's is expostulating, an initiation into a guilt brought on by that kind of betrayal, um, which is a betrayal that involves subjecting another person to the most intimate site of your symptom formation, and exposing yourself at the level of you can see I cannot help myself, but not yet asking for help, not yet saying this is what I need you to do for me. Simply in this mode of exposure, which, as Anna rightly says, is something like a compulsive bearing of a cross. And yes, Anna, go ahead.
So I would describe this further as essentially like not just a initiation in the typical sense, but something closer to a specifically Gnostic initiation, in the sense that I was talking about the Gnostics earlier, that the Gnostic assumption is that you are determined by your nature. So it's like, in the case of the Valentinians, it's like people with spiritual natures are determined to be spiritual. People with material natures are determined to be material. And I think you can read Kierkegaard as effectively doing Valentinianism inside out, where it's like he's effectively declaring a war on somebody like Hegel, who is really actually kind of trying to demonstrate his spiritual nature. Kierkegaard, on the other hand, is essentially trying to initiate people into his spiritual nature. But in the process of doing that, he has to crucify it in a way that prevents it from being demonstrated in a way that could possibly be respected. So it's, in this sense, it's more consistently Lutheran than what Hegel was doing, because Hegel is, insofar as Hegel implies a Gnostic initiation, it's an initiation where the cross is to some degree displaced from yourself, that the cross becomes an object of speculative reflection. Whereas for Kierkegaard, it's re-interiorized. So the experience of the cross is the experience of you, the cross that you have to bear is the determination of your nature and the bondage of your will to that nature. And that's what I describe. I mean, people tend to read Kierkegaard. Somebody like Cyril Regan, for example, tends to read Kierkegaard as an anti-Gnostic because he's critiquing Hegel and Hegel's specific kind of Gnosticism, which is more disruptive for the history of philosophy by way of Marx and other interpreters of Hegel. Kierkegaard seems non-disruptive because of the way that he interiorizes this exact kind of initiation. So it's like people can essentially go insane reading Kierkegaard and then kind of be normal on the outside because their insanity is entirely held within themselves. Whereas what Hegel does, which is in a sense more apocalyptic, is that he externalizes the insanity. He's like, this
Yeah,
Gnostic
Kierkegaard's like the dude who's like got everything together, like at home and whatever, and like outside he's weird though, you know?
Yeah, well, exactly right. Hegel had an extremely sort of picture perfect life formally. He was not somebody who was not put together. Kierkegaard, it's like kind of the opposite. Like Kierkegaard is like did have more of this kind of chaotic life, which is I think part of why he was compelled to interiorize. Whereas Hegel, it's like his expression of rebellion against his extremely narrow, at least mature existence, is kind of this apocalyptic revealing of the inner structure of truth itself as it is mediated through the human being. But with Kierkegaard, it's like that is inaccessible to you, and you should not risk that kind of madness. And instead, you should allow yourself to experience the madness of your nature, but it should be a madness that does not allow itself, both tries to get out as much as possible, but also doesn't allow itself to get out. And this is really what the religious function for Kierkegaard, I think, is that it's a function that takes that interiorized madness and allows it to replicate itself without having to change itself. Because the aesthetic and the ethical are both more, in some sense, theurgical. They're transformative expressions of the madness, which Kierkegaard forces into opposition with each other. And then he just halts the entire process through this leap of faith, which is just sort of what allows you to retreat ever farther into your own Gnostic core.
Yeah.
What
So there's I mean we can so I'll formulate things like
There's
this.
another thing I
Yeah.
want to say
Go
before.
ahead.
I feel like calling Kierkegaard, it's almost like he's too quiet as to be doing anything with. So I could see why he's Gnostic, but like everything with Kierkegaard for me, like just comes across as like super ego, you know? Like he's like just got the strongest super ego you ever met. Like he won't tell you about all the bands he likes or whatever. It's like his own little world. You know what I'm saying?
Certainly the function of secrecy is very important. And well, I would want to formulate things like this, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to list off the definitions of anxiety that are given, and then if anyone wants to have any final words about Kierkegaard, please do. And then, but we do need to try to talk about Heidegger a little bit, and I imagine there are some of you who would like to do that. If the Protestant Church can basically say, and this is the value for them of absolute depravity. This axiom, absolute depravity, is yes, we are immersed in sin, sinfulness, and there's only grace could rescue us from it. But the fact that I know this about myself makes makes it possible for me to enter into some kind of rectifying relationship, especially with someone who I can be sure, I mean, unclear how, but I can be sure is more is closer to salvation than myself. And this is the reason why all of the ecclesiastical inventions of the Protestant Church revolve around the spectrum of perfection, which goes from the members to the ministers. In our context, in our country, what was called the doctrine of the halfway covenant, exemplifies this. Basically, in the 17th century, something like 80%, 70 or 80% of the churchgoers to Protestant churches in the South, New England, wherever, were not actually members because the bar was so high. As usual, the Protestant emphasis on holiness, sanctification, all that kind of stuff. And so there was a movement to have the children of members brought into the church, and also to have some kind of middle ground where you can kind of be halfway in, halfway into the church covenant, halfway out, to make it feel like you're not just excluded and engaged in a pointless in a interminable pursuit against. But there is in that pain. It involves a lot of pain and misery and ecstatic expressions of longing. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure you can call to mind any images of a Pentecostal church or something like that. Also, a great deal, a need for a guarantee is involved. Kierkegaard, as we heard before, is hystericizing that constellation in the sense of making this anti-Pelagian injunction against the idea that we could save ourselves, that we could and that we are responsible for rectifying the sin, which, if we think that, we fail to even conceive of sin on its own proper grounds as something that belongs to the individual, is brought into the world by the individual. But there is this sort of well, just to put it again in a vulgar way, I don't know if any of you have ever tried the following technique with a loved one. Doesn't Could be romantic, could be not. But to indicate in some way that you are in an impossible position and that you cannot be reached or helped. That is a very ambiguous technique. It's a nuclear option because it could engender the courage of the other to try to condescend to you, to rescue you. It could also leave you in a state of permanent abandonment by everyone who feels that it's not worth it to try to transgress against someone who is withholding the secret of their desire in order for it to be revealed. Could go either way. Probably the more that you do it with the same person, the less likely it is to succeed. But that is something like Kierkegaard's gambit, and I could imagine a situation maybe where Regina does try, and maybe he refuses her then as well. But that is, I mean, the question is whether or not that strategy of absolute exposure to your own impossibility can actually help you in some way. I mean, maybe it can't, maybe it can. But it's for this reason. I'm just going to read these definitions we have. Then anyone who wants to say anything, please go ahead, and then we'll do Heidegger with the remaining time. So the first definition, which we've already talked about, is anxiety is ignorance of that which it is innocent of. That's the first one. Anxiety is a kind of ignorance in an innocence, but it's an innocence of something which it cannot say what it is, because otherwise it would not be innocent of that thing.
On that note, I have to go.
Yeah,
Thank
please.
you for
If you have to go, by all means.
doing this. This was very good.
Yeah,
Goodbye.
yeah, no problem. Thank you, Anna. The second definition is anxiety is, and X mentioned this earlier, anxiety is freedom's actuality as the possibility of possibility. This kind of suspended freedom entangled with itself. That's how he writes about it. The third definition is anxiety is a sympathetic antipathy and antipathetic sympathy. Maybe I won't try to resolve that one. The fourth definition is that anxiety is non-ambiguity. It's non-ambiguous. It has an object. The fifth is that anxiety is the relation of innocence to the forbidden. And those are the ones that occur within the purview of the first chapter and are most fundamental, although he does keep making comments about about it. So before we make the transition, for any of you who want to stay on, any further any further? Okay, so Ryan says he keeps coming back to this, to this wish, if only he had not introduced sin, this counterfactualism. Um, yes, like it is, yeah, his problem with the counterfactual reasoning on this question is that it is a kind of disavowal. Yeah. Um, and then X says it's tough because he's particular about there being any hope for something quantitatively in a more or less. He's hoping for the thing to just posit itself. Right. It is it feels, well, as we know, Kierkegaard is someone who constantly is reinventing aliases for himself. You could perform some kind of Kierkegaardian procedure if you were someone who had the willpower to constantly make new Twitter accounts or something like that. Uh, and the worry or anxiety that is motivating that is something akin to having to defend yourself in an argument with somebody who wants you to stop arguing with them. Uh, because in such a context, the more that you strengthen your position, the more absurd you seem to be, even as you can feel some kind of continuous extension of your, again, I'm sorry to keep taking this context, but in a lover's quarrel, the more the argument goes on, there is at least a temptation to make your thoughts much more consistent than they really are, which includes saying, well, what I meant by X was Y. Uh, what I really mean, what my problem is here is so on and so on. And what is constructed is an image that is progressively alienated from the horizon of the encounter. Um, and so you get further and further away from the point of the experience as you attempt to make it more consistent. So similarly, I mean that is at least how I am picturing his the importance he attributes to making sure the qualitative moment of sin is not the same thing as this accumulation of sinfulness by humanity, which of course could be. I mean, the notion, the liberal notion of progress, at least, is very compatible with that. Uh, it's as continuous structurally as much of an extensive notion of sin as what he's describing. And then there's this notion of hope, yes, as Ix is saying, can't be hope even because that's implying he wants something to happen within time. It can't be something that quantifies itself, it has to be the thing. And yeah, and you may not even, yeah, I mean, you can't know that you would recognize what would appear to you in the form of a saving faith. But that is what anxiety, I mean, the last chapter, which I didn't give you all, the last chapter of the book is called Anxiety as Saving Faith, something like that. Because anxiety is supposed to be anxiety as saving through faith. That's how he calls it. Because anxiety is supposed to be this. It is a suspension of action. It's an indication of this locus at which all the drama is occurring, and at which it's so easy to slip into alibis, explanations. And the only thing that can fix our attention there, according to him, is dogmatics, theological dogmatics. And it's not. It doesn't seem to be a metaphor, or it doesn't seem to be that does not seem to be an ironic assertion. Was there anything else?
Maybe just a comment
Please.
on the um on the quantitative and the leap.
Hmm.
Just because it struck me, because I needed to assign a missing link between Heidegger and Hegel, uh, because I knew that uh, as I was reading the logic that it became clear that when Heidegger speaks of the leap, he's exactly speaking about those thresholds uh, of the qualitative that Hegel is describing in the quantity uh, um, section of the logic, and that basically we are like I was wondering where he gets it from, and I see that I should have thought of that, but the insistence to start at the level of logic of essence comes from Kierkegaard. Like, because to me, at least, it seems quite clear that he's constantly like shadow situating himself with respect to Hegel, and that he kind of lives in the pages of the logic to a large extent.
Hmm.
And I think that there's a decision to start at the level of the logic of essence. Uh, anyway, or that there is something about the quantitative that is kept at bay, uh, and the entire development is kept at bay.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, in the introduction that he gives, which is a bit of a wall, is a kind of, I mean, certainly I don't think he's being ironic about dogmatics, but he certainly is being ironic about the philosophical public, and that includes Hegel as well as Schelling, and then in connection with Schelling, some he has some comments about this Franz von Boder guy,
Bother, yes.
yeah, and which are very interesting.
Hmm.
Uh, but his comments at the introduction do, I mean, there's something like the logic. We hear today that logic culminates in actuality, but it makes um, as little sense, or logic is as injured by the inclusion of actuality in it as actuality is uh, injured by its inclusion in logic.
Hmm.
And that is true of the logic of essence. I mean, that's where the logic of essence ends, is with absolute relation and all the modalities stuff, actuality, possibility, necessity. So he's not talking about subjective logic. Another Hegel connection is that he continues to refer to anxiety as the qualification of dreaming spirit,
Hmm.
which is from the Hegel philosophy of spirit, from the psychology section, or the anthropology, that first phase of the encyclopedia of the later philosophy of spirit. But the waking dreaming distinction also figures in the earlier philosophy of spirit. So he is keyed into these moments of discomfort within the Hegelian system, and what logic is really about. Um, and I mean, it is, well, I'll say this in connection with the Heidegger, but we don't have to just completely stop talking about Kierkegaard. Whatever else we can say about the Heidegger being in time, it definitively and decisively makes personality into a logical problem. It's not just an empirical one, not just a psychological one, not even just a phenomenological one, although that is obviously very important. But Dasein does not have a name because you do not resolve your personality by being named. Uh, and the transition between the logic of essence as this kind of uh, self-revealingness of being, and the logic of the subject, the concept, is this transition in scale between the thing and the name. Again, to put it in a very very vulgar terms, and that is precisely where Kierkegaard is situating himself. As as in there is his Dasein, yeah, in the pages of the logic, and in where logic says that it can um, provide guidance to signifying agency of human beings, which is real in a way that the manipulation of symbols obviously cannot be. And noticed by Kierkegaard, who deploys that practice, as far as it will go.
Hmm.
Um, and so, yeah, I read Kierkegaard as kind of trying to follow out the possibility of Hegelian activism, and it's for that reason that he's a big reader of all these right Hegelian, or old Hegelian guys, all these theologians, Mar Heinecke and Gerschel, and all these names that have been lost to history. But everyone who's deeply concerned with theology, the status of theology in relation to philosophy, and
Hmm.
X says, he ends the excerpt saying sin posits relation between a difference as a drive. Maybe you could expand on, because I don't have it in my mind exactly what you're describing. Um, but certainly at the level of sin as a relation, it is that is its kind of primary horizon, in not a dissimilar way as repression is. Well, I've lost, because we had a Wi-Fi loss or something earlier. I've lost the my little picture of the Freud model, but
Hmm.
repression introduces a difference into the unconscious that it cannot generate simply by the kind of well, again, for Freud, associative fluctuations that are most accessible to us in dreams. The repression is something which allows the ego to communicate with what it cannot straightforwardly take on as its own. It can be exposed to something heterogeneous. I mean, the repressed is heterogeneous in a very literal sense, and so all of these detours have to be built around it. Um, and the path of analysis is to kind of, I guess, punctuate the heterogeneity of the symptom, not and certainly not to assimilate the ego to it, which is, I mean, that is what's called ego psychology, what is usually referred to as therapy in our day, are better and worse techniques of neurotic assimilation of the ego to the symptom. And that is not that press to homogenization is certainly not what right, yeah, all of and yeah we talked about some of this attachment stuff last time. Attachment.
This actually goes back to my thread on
Mm-hmm,
Jorge.
mm-hmm.
I connect this all back here. Okay. So,
And
okay.
then we do a Kierkegaard, but go, or sorry, Heidegger, but yes, go ahead.
Okay. No, this is, I mean, like the therapy thing,
Hmm.
like, is that not Heidegger?
Go on.
Is that not Heidegger? I thought, I mean, I think, like, but now we don't need to go back on that. We already got past Kierkegaard. So we don't need to go back on.
Well,
But
I
that was
may
something I
have,
was waiting for
depending
somebody to
on
bring
depending
up the
on
therapy
the.
thing. I was like, oh, finally, I can finish on.
Well,
You know?
maybe this is in the direction of that thought. and maybe I'll share it in the Google Drive or something. But about a year or so ago, I was bored enough to try to reconstruct in a sort of satirical mode what it would be like for Heidegger to be your psychoanalyst, or one psychoanalyst. And it certainly is it is a guided meditation through an almost unbearable weight of your own existence. And the purpose of it is to squeeze out every alibi you could give yourself, every possibility of flight to beings in the world. Maybe I'll even just put it like this, which is more vulgar than I would be comfortable usually. But whenever I encounter someone that I find uninteresting, I guess my intuition is usually to think that they are hiding something from themselves and therefore me. And so it is their own fault for being uninteresting because they don't want to risk the exposure that would require. Obviously, in this hypothetical situation, I am reserving the measure of interesting for myself, which is maybe, a problem. But something like, that sort of militant diagnostic attitude. X said earlier in a message to me that Heidegger's attitude, as it's coming across in the excerpt, is almost one of disgust. Maybe there'll be people who disagree with that, but it's certainly a deep dissatisfaction with the forms of self-representation that accumulate to the Dasein. But yeah, with that being said, let's progress a little bit into the Heidegger. And again, if any of you need to uh, to go, that's perfectly fine. We'll just keep going on as long as there are people who are willing to. Um, okay, being in time. You know, just for my own curiosity, Amakai, what is being in time about as a
Well,
book?
what is Being in Time about as a book? It's about it's about being abruptly in need of producing a report of he's been doing for the last 15 years of his life. And it's compiled in a sort of really covertly kind of haphazard way. Uh, and it's a sort of amalgamation of all of his investigation of all of his painstaking investigations of all of his lecture courses. But what it does try to telegraph in its way is what he developed as the analytic of Dasein, as the analytic of everydayness, is basically excavating the uh, background noise of one's life the into the first draft of what is always already a knowledge, not a knowledge, but an understanding of being that has to be developed out of it. That has to be interpreted, always uh, allowing some threads that can be and must be followed. I think that disgust notwithstanding, it will help reading the book as a sort of confessional autobiography of Dasman. It's no one's confession. And I think I will never be quite able to convince anyone, even myself, that Heidegger is not always some kind of off-putting, even though it changes which kind, from text to text. But I think if you manage to pull off what I'd call a suspension of disregard, you will find that he is a very good guide into the heart of the matter. So it is worthwhile to just like hold it a little bit on the antipathy and see what he's trying to gesture at. Because Heidegger is always the least important, the least interesting thing in a Heideggerian text. Like every philosopher says that about themselves, but he's like 100% right about that. It's
Now,
better to read
I've
him.
seen like there's like a meme where it's like Heidegger lore, and it's like, but then Heidegger gameplay is like a a dash or whatever, like in the text, like like how he's big on like uh
Mhm.
yeah, like syntax or whatever. So yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, the I guess the point of a Heidegger text is always to uh, uh make a sort of framework of gesturing at something that will disappear into that something once you've finished with the text. The mistake that most people do that encumbers their relationship to Heidegger, that they try to either take the particular um, uh, terminological framework or framework of plays on words or etymologies that a single text or flow of thought uses. They try to isolate that as a terminology, or even worse, try to accumulate out of as if there was like a Heidegger dictionary,
They try to
where
systematize. They try to say this is the whole thinker when it's not the thinker, it's the moment of the thinker.
uh, well, not even
You
systematized,
know what I'm
but really
saying?
lexical. Even lexicalizing is it becomes off-putting very easily when it's laid to rest as something non-provisional. There is something that can only work about what Heidegger is doing when it's kept
It's
provisional,
only
kept
erotic.
as one draft in a series of drafts. And the problem with being in time, and why he's the first to be so ambivalent about it, is that it's the closest to looking like it's not that. It's closest to looking like it's there to stay in that uh just so terminological configuration. And then it really might seem very easily like the height of arbitrariness and high-handedness and antipathy in a lot of ways that if he were a little less careful and particular on anyway, if he had a different set of symptoms, he could avoid. Uh, but again, I would read it as a sort of very formalized and very still seeking an alibi and a sort of wissenschaftlich affectation, but something that always tries to approach an autobiography that no one is writing. That like the confession that belongs by not by default, but like the confession that is in each case mine.
So, what I wanted to is I was debating on whether or not to make a prefatory remark. I think that suits it perfectly. I think we are going to say the same thing, or I'm going to say the same thing as you, but maybe in a more impious mode, which is that but a confession of my own, which is that uh well, X was also perturbed and preferred the Kierkegaard. He told me, and I think that is certainly not dismissive. And that it was winding towards something absent, which is not irrelevant. So we'll get to that point in a moment, more concretely at least. But my confession is that the only book of philosophy that I've ever read, like from the front to the back, in like straight through, is Being in Time. I've read other stuff, but in all directions. Um, I've read psychoanalysis books from front to back, very many of them. But I say that because Being in Time is to me the quintessential modern novel. It's about a guy who is deeply dissatisfied with the world, does not cannot allow himself to be assimilated, to identify with anyone else. Crucially, does not have a name, is nameless, has no true name, cannot suffer a name, and is on a quest to find the significance of the pain that is guiding him to an absent point, which he'll never reach because
Mhm.
the author couldn't be bothered to complete it. So it's not even his fault that he doesn't reach his destination, or rather is already there. So, but I think all of that is can be taken in the same with the same meaning as it's a confession. It's a confession
Not,
of no one.
not only that, but I was alighting, like a lot of what I said now. I wrote to myself like, I don't know, 12 years ago. Last time I read the whole book, uh, uh, which to me too, it's like one of the it is so many of the things that you just said. Yes, it is like a novel. Yes, you read it from for that reason. You follow the narrative. Yes. Uh, um, and I developed it. What I didn't say now, that this a sort of what's it called? Hard-boiled detective novel. Sorry, I was sitting on it because I forgot the term. Uh, in terms of a hard-boiled detective novel, like basically somebody who, you know, wakes up in a strange bed, has to retrieve, like, something awful has happened, but oh but there's something happening here, but you don't know what it is, that sense. Like in the Ballad of a Thin Man. So very much that sense. And it's really only tempered by the fact that it's happening to no one. So the affectivity of the narrative is covert in that sense, that it's happening through this kind of third person ethos of it never feels scholarly, but it's in text, it's in this almost the mode of a compilation or I always think of it as writing the encyclopedia before writing the actual investigations. In the sense of Hegel, there is something like that architectonics of the encyclopedia in Being in Time. Except the novel setup, it does have the propulsion of a novel, but it's like so many distinct discussions that are really stumps of discussion that happen in a more expansive way elsewhere. So,
Right. Well, when my experience of the novelistic character is maybe less to do with the narrative structure and more to do with the main character who is behaving like the modern the
yeah,
subject
that's
of a
that's
modern
what
novel.
the propulsion is. That's what gives it the propulsion. That
Yeah,
the
yeah.
way that the character is moving through the text.
And so a question to put on the table for everyone, and maybe to give some credence to some of X's comments is what is, and I should say it. I am sorry to have excerpted it, just to taken it out. This just portion, excised it from the book because it makes more sense in context, but it certainly isn't. This the style is not different, and it begins with a quest to find what the being of being is, which is not itself a being. That's the motto, which you may or may not have heard before. And so it is a quest to find. It's the question of the meaning of being, as also comes up in the excerpt, um, and of the meaning and of the being of that question, which is the being of the character of the Dasein. Um, and so you have the motivation of the book is everything Amichai says. That whole kind of self-accounting is at play. It is motivated also by Husserl, his master, his teacher, who asks him to write the regional uh, ontology of the or regional phenomenology of man, of kind of anthropology. It's him. It's him. He does that, and then Husserl assigns this other guy, Oscar something, to do the regional phenomenology or ontology of mathematics. Both are supposed to be um, extensions of
Or
the
the Yarbuch or something.
yeah. Both are supposed to be extensions of the phenomenological program, and both explode the phenomenological program. And so Heidegger is tasked with doing something like an anthropology, or a phenomenology of the human, a regional ontology of the human, something like that. And this is
I
what
remember it had something to do with religion, but maybe just amalgamating it with Husserl treating him as kind of the religious guy, the religion guy.
well, certain. I mean, I at least as I remember it, that's Husserl's instructions, and then he has that period in Marburg, which is what
Yes, yeah, I might be conflating.
so he, but I wouldn't be surprised if Husserl saw it that way, maybe. Um, but so yeah, so the question that I wanted to put down is um well, maybe just as straightforwardly as possible. What is anxiety? What is anxiety for the Dasein? Or maybe even more specifically, what is the anxiety about?
Uh,
Are we real? It's like a Gnostic thing. It's like a Gnostic thing. Like, you
Are we
know,
here?
yeah. Like, is everything a simulation? That's what I'm gonna guess it is. I don't know. That's where I'm going with it. I
Well,
don't know.
it is certainly related to the status of being in the world. So I think you're on it with that.
Yeah,
Uh,
I feel like Genshin Impact is actually okay. So I'm gonna go off on like this Hoyoverse thing a little bit. Okay, so like Hoyoverse games are like there's like their first game was Honkai Impact Third, which is basically like a tech pessimist manifesto. Basically, it's like okay, machines win, blah 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 blah, humanity's doomed, all that shit. And then Genshin Impact is like the sort of like, what if we could save a good humanity? What if we could like preserve a Garden of Eden? So I think of Genshin as like the Heidegger, like sort of like, okay, how can we preserve the good of technology or whatever from going too far before we went too far? You know what I'm saying? But I don't know where I was going with this. But that's one of the reasons I think of it as that's one of the reasons I think of being as that. It's because I think of Genshin Impact as Heideggerian, even though I don't really know what that would mean.
mhm. Well, I'm not familiar with those. I know Ix is a player of games of those games at least. And and certainly the kind of um I don't know if preservation is the right word, but at least it appears that Dasein is anxious about it's not fully in the world, um, but it's not clear in what sense or where it is when it is not in the world, when it's not immersed in beings, when it's not flying towards beings, when it's not being covered up by the they, the public.
Yeah, a
Uh,
lot of people try and say it's like nationality or of course there's the Duganist reading of it, like the national particularity of Gaia's son. You know what I'm saying? But Heidegger doesn't, and I'm not sure if it's just because he's like, he knows that that ends the fun of the game, like where it's like, yeah, that's right, because that's not fun, you know, that's not fun. When somebody figures you out, it's like, but I don't think that's what he meant. But I could see why somebody would go that direction with it.
and death, I mean, as Ryan is saying, death is such a key term because death is what marks that limit between being in the world and not being in the world, which is the possibility of the impossibility of Dasein and individuates Dasein. Death individuates Dasein, but anxiety is it also has the function of individuation at the phenomenological level. And so X is also saying it's being toward freedom, uh, but for him, the being has knowledge of things it's grasping for, what the possibilities are, things that aren't there. Right. He makes some there are wishes, there are things we will that we want, addictions, um, but in um, in all of these we miss something, but in what we our I guess you could say our knowledge, even our dim knowledge of what we are missing in those attachments to beings, uh, we have anxiety, or we are lighted upon anxiety. We're disclosed to the more primordial uncanniness of of our existence, which is not all there and won't be all there until we die, when we suffer completion. Um, Although that's a completion that we can never acquire. Um, that's something. Well, I guess that would be a question if we can acquire knowledge about that. Um, And yeah, it's also a nice comment that Kierkegaard, at least he tries to emphasize the point that anxiety is an ignorance, indicates an ignorance in the midst of innocence. I mean, they're not worlds apart, but there is a distinction in some way, yeah. So what's this care? What is this care business about, and what is its relation to anxiety?
Oh, maybe can I wind it down a little bit, just a step before?
Go ahead.
Um, okay, just to mark the position of anxiety. Um, so in the first part of the book, the analysis of everydayness in the sense of the use of tools and the immersion in the neighboring world. uh, we have basically the network of significance that is lived in, uh, that beckons to us in the stuff we use, that is completely transparent or non-present as such to us, as long as it works. And the moments in the usual running of the machine, in the proceedings of everydayness, where it kind of bumps into itself, are where the tools break, right? Where they get lost, or they break, or they misfire, or they function somehow in a way that announces itself. And basically, uh, anxiety is that writ large. Anxiety is the mm, malfunctioning of significance itself. Let's just say the tool of significance breaks down.
Well, you tell me what you think of this formulation. Again, I don't hear it as different, but perhaps it is. Is that Dasein reads itself like a tool in its everydayness, among others, and then it suffers something analogous to a malfunction of significance itself, which reveals to it that the kind of thing it took itself to be is not at all what it thought.
Well, I think it didn't really think itself to be anything at all, except in terms of it. There is a certain level of
Can it think?
inhabiting yourself in the
Can
world
it
that
think?
is
What was
what?
that?
Can an it think?
Yeah,
That's a big
yes, but
question.
only if
That's a
it,
big question.
only if it gets some help. Uh, I
I
would
just thought that was
have to.
like a I don't know. I'm playing like the whole embodied whatever thing, embodied thing. Whatever.
So this question, Amakai, is not an easy one, and the reason why I put it like that is because there is something like a desire to proceed in a with a transcendental method in being in time.
Wait, watch this question. Just bring me
That
back, okay? Because
whether or not
it
anxiety,
popped my bubble.
right, whether or not anxiety is something that is um in a maybe this is more straightforward, in a similar way that in the critique of pure reason, the consciousness has all of these experiences of space and of objects in space and time, and then takes itself to be one of those things, like those that it experiences in space and time, and then as a secondary procedure has to rediscover that being is not a predicate. That the kind of thing that it
Oh,
is as a subject is actually not commensurable with the empirical objects of its consciousness. And there is something, I mean, Heidegger is in the midst of neo-Kantian resurgence, and he does
mhm.
structure it in the way of a transcendental deduction, not only because he calls it the analytic. I mean, that that itself doesn't prove anything, but the very form of the progression with anxiety coming at this point, which is after the structure of everydayness has been given its total
Mhm.
presentation, and you have this world of this spatiality, which is a totality, and it is entangled or whatever, fallen, thrown into it, and then it has to recover itself. And anxiety is the pathway by which it recovers itself. Um, and the characteristic mark of the transcendental method is that it requires a finite number of constitutive categories, which, I mean, Heidegger was intended to explode the kind of neo-Kantianism in the psychological domain, even in the political domain, in phenomenology as well. He was not satisfied with how it had proceeded, but he was on his way to repeat it in this, new in this commencement of this Dasein, which was supposed to expose that form of procedure to its own instability. Very similar to Schelling. Schelling had almost the exact same stylistic methodological procedure of taking on this method of transcendental deduction, structuration, and exposing it to its underlying instability. But that does require making this first step of saying, it must take itself to be this way, and its falsity is the possibility of falsification that is also this freedom, this being towards this horizontal being that ultimately he can't finish the book, because if he did, then it would be another piece in this endless puzzle of transcendental philosophy.
I think he can only play, again, he can only play that game as long as it's kept provisional. Once it's not that it's not in earnest, it's that what's in earnest is the pursuit that he will use just about anything to get at, so that he's never mindful of the conceit he's using as such. He's always borrowing conceits. It's true about phenomenology as much as it's true about Nazism, and as much as it's true about well, I'd say the things that he does not avow are a lot more abiding for him, which the last 2 years of my life are kind of like hunting down to what extent it's really living in the German idealism, like 3 or 4 guys. That's why I joined your neighborhood, basically. But 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 the things that he does use as conceits, I would always counsel to look to see them as pointing away from themselves.
Well, this allows me to ask a good question, which also should interest Ixon, who was mentioning again in a message the self-reference of the Dasein. I mean, comparing to Kierkegaardian self-reference. So
Mhm.
so the question formulated is what is the function of Dasein's self-reference, and if it is modulated, throughout the story, does that modulation have a consistent structure? That last bit is just something in my mind. It doesn't have to be exhausted, and maybe we can append to that. Ixon just says, care came off to me as something he doesn't fully explain. It's an existential priori disposition he starts doing stuff with, but why is it care and not just any other a priori? Yeah. Why does he feel that it must be? Because this is what he says. We have to demonstrate care pre-ontologically.
That's you know what? Are we talking just about the introduction of the Cura fable, or in a different context? Because that's like one of the clunkiest. It's just like he found that and he liked it so much that he had to put it in there.
The care crosses the river, you mean?
Yes.
Uh-huh.
If that's what we're talking about, the insistence on a demonstration, that's just because he's just so happy he got one. Uh, it's not about anything else. Uh, but maybe it's an insistence that repeats itself. So inform me. What do
Yeah,
you mean?
well, yeah, there's that. There's, how in what sense is that pre-ontological? But I think maybe in connection with the question that was asked, or X asked, where does the necessity behind the category of care come from?
Ah, what is the necessity?
I mean, on the one, you could say maybe one easy answer is uh it has been, and of course this was, came before in the book. This is what I was kind of describing earlier to or talking about just a bit a moment ago, that the
mhm.
whole portion of before the excerpt is a kind of description of, I mean, the translated word is everydayness, but the world of objects, of empirical objects, empirical human life, in the day-to-day. Amichai mentioned this proverbial hammer that Heidegger brings up to illustrate the being of everydayness, that we don't we take for granted that things work, and then when they stop working, then we start thinking of them as objects or as substantial beings. But in this, I mean,
As
this may interest
kind of flickers.
yeah, this may interest Ixion, who's thinking about functionalism. It's a deployment of some kind of functionalism, because it sees
Mhm.
there doesn't the substance only enters when a disturbance appears in the system of functions for this world, for the world of Dasein. Okay, and then he has to answer the question, why does Dasein mind when things break down? Uh, you can say, well, you have just assumed that it cares, or what that it minds circularly, because you know some kind of description has some kind of a priori description has been given of how we must take objects to be when we use them. We don't think of them as possessing an independence outside of our use. Only when they exit that use do they, okay, et cetera, et cetera. And then what's revealed in the moment of malfunction, of brokenness, is a concern with the being of things. Uh, and this is sort of where the care thing comes in. But this sort of method, which is not I'm not saying is any more question begging than other philosophical methods, but it's characteristically circular, like transcendental philosophy does, or how it operates, which is here is the here's the provisional appearance and what must be true for it to appear in the way that it does. The structure of disclosure. That's what
Mhm.
is at issue. And the fact that the structure of disclosure always has a provisional status, always can does not stand, does not legitimate its own necessity, is simply the fact that Dasein, or whatever, the subject of consciousness, the moral agent, is needs to come up against new encounters in order to perpetuate its operations. It needs to remain open. Of course, this introduces another problem, which Heidegger is aware of, which is, does the Dasein have a relation to maintaining its own openness to what it will have to process in terms of its functions of everydayness? And then that's where all this anxiety stuff
Mhm.
is relevant, because it's anxiety lives at the site of the self-relation to self-relation.
He doesn't want to live in the open society. He wants fixed, closed commercial state, you could say, if you're trying to take a reductive reading of it. But right?
And well, Fichte is on the road, on a
Mhm.
similar road, further behind, but certainly I mean, this Fichtean category, the Anstoss, the bounder, the block, the check, is that kind of categorization of the encounter, which is debilitating ultimately for Fichte in his program. But something like that has to be registered at the level of the Dasein. So it's true that open society, in the sense of a
Yeah, liberal Fichteans seem to love that.
mhm.
They love the Ansta, but like Fichte did not like it. Fichte did not like it. Like or I wouldn't say liberal Fichteans. I should just say Todd McGowan, 'Cause that's the only one I know of
Mhm.
that I'm talking about. Where I've heard
Yeah.
him talk about that concept, and he's like, I actually think that's a good thing. He's like,
Mhm.
I actually think that's a
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, and this is relevant to our earlier discussion of Protestantism. Evangelical-minded individuals do have a need for some kind for a limit. I mean, limit concepts in general. Um, Otherwise, the presupposition of an infinitely closing interval of time to the apocalypse just has no
no
there's no
mediation. Yeah.
mhm, yeah,
And
no,
everything becomes overwhelming, and then you're caught up in a stream of data, and it's every day is you're looking out the sky and you're like, well, when will the rapture be? When
yeah.
will the rapture be?
And Heidegger certainly is he is confronting the importance of the concept theology of a limit, but he is very attuned to the ambiguity of that sort of urgency that is brought on by the Protestant theology, apocalyptic urgency. Clearly, urgency is something that can be militated by the world as it is, the they, the functions of everydayness, and he talks about it like that. But yeah, but then there's this other thing that Amichai mentions, which is in this justification of care, this myth that care crosses the river thing, as uh, yeah, as a pre-ontological. Because there's kind of two arguments. There's an ontological argument for care, which has to do with mostly what I described, which is, why that Dasein must be concerned with the malfunctions that cut through its world and awaken it to the question of being, which it finds even in, I mean, he says authenticity is a mode of inauthenticity. They're not two separate substances. It's not, like Descartes, extended substance, spiritual substance. It's authenticity is another mode of inauthenticity. Uh, but then there's this need for a pre-ontological justification of care, which is like in this mythic register of Curus um, uh, crossing crossing the river, which now I forget the details of, but Amachai, do you remember how it goes?
Just read it the other day. Um, mm, no, I would have to find it um,
Okay, well I can pull it up, I'm
to
sure.
oh
Okay.
wait, it wasn't in the excerpt that you gave us. I read it.
Is it not?
No, I don't think so. I think I read it in the German, so I'll have to find it and no.
Oh yeah.
Mm,
Well, my bad. Um, I thought it was in there.
ma- maybe it is. I mean, not very.
No, 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 it isn't. I mean, it's
I
not.
move between I move between languages, so I don't know. Maybe I missed some in this text or that. Uh, so I don't want to dissuade anyone from looking for themselves, is what I'm saying.
So he says, like any ontological analysis, the ontological interpretation of Dasein as care, with whatever can be gained from the interpretation, is far removed from what is accessible to the pre-ontological understanding of being, or even to our acquaintance with beings. That the common understanding estranges what is known ontologically by referring it to that with which it is solely ontically acquainted is not surprising. It mixes things up. Nonetheless, even the ontic approach with which we have tried to interpret Dasein ontologically as care might appear to be contrived in a far-fetched and theoretical way, to say nothing of the violence which one could see in our exclusion of the traditional and approved definition of human being. Thus, we need a pre-ontological confirmation of the existential interpretation of Dasein as care This lies in demonstrating that as soon as Dasein expressed anything about itself, it had already interpreted itself as care, even though it did so pre-ontologically. So maybe we can put all. I mean, because my previous.
Here it is. I found it. Okay, I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay, my my previous. Well, first we'll do. X is saying Dasein is self-referential in a way that doesn't have any distinctions that would appear in anything that isn't a Dasein. So everything can be an equivalence. Dasein has total range to not reflect on itself using any other reference point as a mirror. Right, because anything that could function as a mirror could also be a form of flight. And I will say, maybe this will be helpful, maybe not. But I think I can just rerun in a simpler and better way what I said concerning what isn't in the excerpt, but only referring to what you did read, which is that and it concerns this difference between fear and anxiety, which is that the danger that Dasein intuits at the level of its being in the world, whether or not something in the world will remove it from will kill it, um, is already an interpretation of itself that it doesn't fully believe. Otherwise, it would not even engage in the kind of metaphorical usage of the word fear that it obviously does. That is even at issue in anxiety. And that's, again, lots of Heidegger is a kind of hammer that can be used against liberal philosophy and psychology. But for example, what is called evolutionary psychology basically takes the fear of death as a metaphor and then applies it metaphorologically to all possible other situations. Every other case of psychological fear is a metaphor of this fundamental biological possibility of biological negation. But that very metaphor indicates something actually more primitive, which is the need to uh, adjudicate its own sense of danger at the level at which it feels it primordially. So, not at the level of the being that it takes itself to be, which it misinterprets itself as, but in the first instance of that it feels a need to say, this now that I'm feeling must be a reappearance of something else. But that else, the other place that the fear seems to be, that I theorize the fear coming from, is not actually what it takes itself to be, which is kind of a continuous extension of something that must apply to all animals, but rather is the moment of anxiety about its being halfway in the world and halfway out of the world, that it is already in a relationship to death that it can't admit if it has a purely animal interpretation of itself.
Well,
sounds good, Jorge. Thanks for coming. And Ryan also says correspondence with Lacan's distinction between speech, maybe speech and language, or discourse and speech. But yes, certainly. I mean that kind of distinction, signification, and meaning, also imaginary and symbolic, I think are all relevant.
Oh.
Amakai, did I interrupt?
No, I have to chill my dog for a second. He wants to go out and he has to wait. So I'm just muting myself for a second, but I'll be right with you.
So as we start to
Sorry
come.
about
No, no, no,
that.
no.
Um, if I can be a little less glib about the need for ontic quote unquote confirmations, and also to just hone in on why or what role anxiety is playing. Uh, we are we're looking for truth as revelation wherever it happens. The- uh, if the we're not trying to theorize, we're not. I mean, the game that we're playing at this point is phenomenological. We want to hone in on something that shows itself, and um, where was I going with that? Uh, oh, what's completely what doesn't seem likely is that something that is revealed that you can say has its warrant from being exposed on some level is gone, completely over the heads of Dasein heretofore. You have to give it some sort of warrant. Being fastidious and circumlocute about it is like and announce it so much is I think uh, maybe I think makes it seem more artificial than it should be. It's just about like it's improbable that it wouldn't show itself if it's something that you say shows itself. It's not uh, something that is supposed to only be seen as a result of some act of theorizing, as if to a certain specific lens. It has to be something that the eye can see, that the eye can have seen, regardless of the theorizing.
So are you, just a clarification, are you saying that the uh it's not that we should oppose fundamental ontology to onticity as um a deeper theorization of what lacks a theoretical supplement, but that the realm of onticity is misleading because it gives a greater warrant than is possible to situate beings on some kind of firmer metaphysical basis, whereas fundamental ontology is essentially trying to be more true to the imminent uh, lived um, trajectory of Dasein, which does not itself require theorization to go on. Is that
The self theorization of Dasein, the self theorization of the human being, is to understand both. I mean, in the trajectory of the question of being, in the trajectory that's inaugurated by the Greeks, but presumably outside of this trajectory, even more trenchantly, uh, it's to understand both human being and object being in the sense of Vorhandensein, which he goes to great lengths to isolate as not exactly the bugaboo, but what needs to be isolated, and the furthermore of the book, in the Cato sense, the Caterhum senso of the book is that this is not that, the Dasein is not for Hunchенstein. And those places where you can say this is where it's revealed, they have to have been revealed even they have to shine through even in the usual misinterpretation of Dasein in terms of Vorhandensein. Uh, because because to, because we are not. I mean, I'm not sure I'm using gnosis exactly the same the two are, but we cannot be talking about knowledge that one is introduced to in a mystery. It's something that is there to see.
I imagine what you are getting at is it's certainly relevant to all this Hilderland stuff, who is the one I mean the upgrading of Heidegger's program from being in time to what comes after, again for those of you who aren't familiar, is it becomes all about um the task of recovering from I mean, again, I'm sure Amakai will take issue with the way I'm phrasing this, but just for simplicity's sake, the drama of falling prey, self-recovery, the anxiety of being in the world is sort of lifted and dramatized at the level of the recovery from philosophy and the history of metaphysics, the human being, the Dasein, in this journey to recover from the history of metaphysics, which it itself, as a self-interpreting being, may fall prey to. So the centrality of Dasein kind of falls away in the progress of Heidegger's philosophical program, because it as a being is already complicit in the falling prey of the human in the history of metaphysics, which seeks to escape from the kind of disclosure that Amakai mentioned, this revelatory uh, structure. And at some point, poetry, the maybe this is a point at which the Heidegger's functionalism is pushed to the limit, or he's pushing it to the limit. But the function of poetry becomes central, because poetry is supposed to be that which sets up the ground for the revelation of truth to occur. And in that sense, yes, it cannot be a mystery in in the sense in which we would intuitively mean mystical, although the meaning of that term is certainly not straightforward in the history of theology. But the way that many use it, it can't be mystical because the mystical vision is not prepared for in advance. It doesn't. Um, Maybe it itself is the prophecy, but for the question of the revelation of truth, it always has to kind of be anchored or stand on the ballast of something which is doing the work of remembering or reconstituting something,
Yes.
repossessing even. I mean, lots of Heidegger's procedures are some kind of repossession of a thinker or a moment in the history of thought in a way that they could not themselves articulate their own thought, but is better done by Heidegger himself. That's his mode. And so
Like
uh,
Aristotle.
yeah, Aristotle would be the
Many
paradigm.
Aristotelians do not like this stuff. No.
No.
It's Aristotle.
First of all, Aristotle is who he learns it from, uh, or he modeled himself after. Like the way that you ride the endoxa as a manner of elaborating your own uh, method to yourself, or your own way of thinking to yourself.
Yeah.
Basically inhabiting the history of thought as a series of
Yeah, I
for
respect his Aristotle. This
first
isn't a dig
draft.
at. Yeah, I respect his
Yeah,
ability
well,
to. Yeah,
it's
go.
just it's just an astute reference because it's very much alive for him, the way Aristotle is doing business. Uh, but also he has like a very just so Aristotle, like he has a very just so everybody else.
Right, except for, and maybe this is getting a bit far afield, but um, except for Schelling, because Schelling is and Schelling is the one that he feels like he is actually like the thing that he, I mean, as it says, yeah, revelation that reveals to itself that it is a revealing. It is a revealing of revelation. Is there's a distortion, maybe a more obvious distortion that is maybe actually for Heidegger as a thinker more fruitful, like for the distortion to actually be clearer. In most other cases, except for Schelling, where it is as if he is reading himself into it straightforwardly, but it is working. I mean, they are more a part of the same pathway historically, which is this kind of convergence of
Mhm.
commencement in, I mean, I spoke about it earlier, commencement in the history of philosophy is awakening and also exposure of that history to its underlying instability. That's one of the reasons why Hegel was so taken up with Schelling, because Schelling just had this uncanny ability to upset other people from within their own world of philosophical language and terms. Um,
He was the ultimate traitor to the PNC before the PNC. I mean, he was like a young, like, he started young. He got, his shot young, like,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
Very
So,
interesting, actually.
he
and
was
then,
a
like, he was
yeah.
always changing. So, yeah.
Yes, and he was always evolving, or so he would think of himself. All right, are there any we should probably close up soon, unfortunately, but are there any lasting thoughts, anything on our chests about this business about anxiety in Kierkegaard and Heidegger?
If it's still me, then I would say that I found the Kierkegaard that it's my first time reading. I probably
Hmm.
should have read it before. Not first time reading Kierkegaard, but this text.
Hmm.
And I mean, I need to read more of the text on its own terms to know exactly what Kierkegaard is doing,
Hmm.
because on his own terms. But I can definitely see how. And I mean, Heidegger does not deal with anxiety per se too much, not even in Bringing Time. It's all really a telegraphing of discussions that happen elsewhere. And one of the elsewheres is here in this text. Um, and and a lot of where it sends Heidegger will unfold in the 30s exactly uh, in the understanding of techne as uh, as this open field of Seinkunden and of as a zone of ambiguity where everything stands for a crenane for a discriminating decision and all of it very in a very concentrated and so the way that techne, as I think I mentioned the other day, is juxtaposed all throughout the 30s and into the 40s with the uncanny, which is the reflex of anxiety that lingers beyond it, together with boredom that kind of thickens the preoccupation that makes it more than just a stump. Uh, so a lot of it, enter if you insert this context of Kierkegaard's discussion of anxiety and sin and guilt, the entire trajectory opens up into the 40s a lot more clearly, I think. So that was instructive for me.
Hmm. Yeah. A formulation is coming to me on the back of what you're saying, and it also is occurring that we left out a crucial term in Heidegger, but I maybe I can present things in a way that could be helpful, which is that for Heidegger, anxiety is, I mean, relevant to the Aristotle comment. He mentions this. He has a mention of Aristotle. I forget if I put it into the excerpts that I gave you or not, but it's to Aristotle's rhetoric, his psychology. But it's where Aristotle develops these the categories of mood, of emotion, and
Hmm.
there's no anxiety in Aristotle. I mean, there couldn't be anxiety in Aristotle. In the place of anxiety, there is awe. Um, but
Hmm.
Heidegger just kind of takes the whole system of moods, emotions in the rhetoric, which is a political treatise, about
Yeah.
atmosphere, social atmosphere, and then passes it all through, or rather, anchors it in anxiety, and so changes the whole valence of the thing. Obviously, changes it, completely strips away the kind of uh, hallucinations of the origin of liberalism in Greek political practice, which is a
Hmm.
complete myth, obviously. But so that's one of the reasons why people get upset at him for doing that. But I mean, in passing all other affects through anxiety, or making anxiety come out of all other affects, all other moods, as the truth of them, he lubricates the relationship to action. And so the term that was being left out was resoluteness. That's what comes up.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so Heidegger can say to you, um, uh, you, and speaking from the position of Dasein, you have the power to give my discourse a name. My discourse, which is uh, the impossibility of self-naming in the midst of this interminable self-interpretation of being in the world that is, always on its way to its own uncanniness, always on its way to discovering underneath its excuses the meaning of the pain that it feels on the day to day. You have the power, you, the listener, have the power to name this discourse because I know that you care. I know you care about the anxiety that you feel emanating from my discourse. And that is how, ladies and gentlemen, Heidegger and other teachers, other pedagogical geniuses can sprout schools of philosophical thought. They say, what you hear that is missing in me, in my discourse, you have the power to name it, and I retain the monopoly on the discourse at the same time as you can feel like you are, becoming an original thinker. So, Heidegger is at the center of this moment in the history of philosophy that has all of these branches, Gadamer and Arendt, Derrida. I mean, whatever. There's more. Um, Lacan, it's in some way, in some.
Well, I was just going to say that this is what I want to say, that is
Kojève.
giving, specifically giving what you don't have, uh, as the gift of love. I think he gets very close to developing it in these terms in the 43 Heraclitus lectures. Uh, at least when I read that in conjunction with Lacan, it seemed to me like like Lacan was haunting this, like he was somehow but sometimes there are texts that's like whenever you read them, you're like, okay, everyone I've ever read this, but that's just an effect of the text. That doesn't mean it's true. But with all these caveats, I would suggest that that is something Lacan picks up from also in his pedagogical practice from this tendency in Heidegger, with a completely different set of affectations, but like letting yes,
Yeah, yeah,
letting
and
what he
that,
does not have be productive in others.
yeah. By contrast, and this is so Heidegger, he lubricates the historicity of Dasein because he gives you this chance at resolution to name. I mean, yeah, Ixion says, read into me, take name what you feel is missing. What relation that has to love is another question. It's a good one. But certainly it is a play of negation, no doubt. But so with Heidegger, you go from anxiety to resoluteness to action, historicity, just straight through. That's the goal. Or at least that,
Here in being in time, yes.
yeah, that's fluidity. Whereas in Kierkegaard, the function of anxiety is embarrassment, suspension, maybe not paralysis, but it is a kind of experience of being barred from action, an action that is falsified. I mean, in this inquest, in this questioning, this Ixion used the word bewilderment at an earlier point. I think that is apt. It is a confusion that becomes it's ampliative in the sense that it is enriching in terms of sense, significance, or at least tries to be, but it is not a confusion that seeks to dissolve its self-entanglement, or extract itself from the source of the confusion. It is, I mean, he is performing his own anxiety at the persistence of the miscommunication of dogmatic concepts,
Mm-hmm.
and that miscommunication in dogmatics is sin. It is the site of sin, and well, Ixion says, he's saying you ought to be existentially anxious. I don't know if I think you're talking about Heidegger. If I'm in the everyday at home, my anxiety is about the things around me. Uh, why is it not allowed? It's not well, but of course, one always, because authenticity is a mode of inauthenticity. Um, the measure is ultimately up to you. I mean, if you can name the wandering of your own anxious discourse in with the categories of, if you can ontologize it, then you have, I mean, he would say that is okay. I mean, you would have succeeded at authentication. Whether or not that is stable, or,
So
I
it's
mean,
sort of
that,
like when somebody brands themselves on Twitter and whatever, and it's like, I know this isn't a thing yet, but we're gonna make it one. We're gonna hyperstition this bitch. We're
sure.
gonna
and
get this one right into orbit.
and Heidegger, or the figure can always, he's not threatened by that, no more than he's threatened by all of these Heideggerians, or people who are following him and then trying to overcome him, Levinas, Gadamer, I mean, again, whoever, Kojève, because he can always, and has a right to say, the stability of your authentication is not guaranteed in advance. And finally, at some point, it can only be guaranteed or it can only be set in place or anchored by the practice of poetry. So, all philosophical extensions of Heidegger's program at some point are inherently unstable and will fail inevitably. So I guess he would look down on it, but he would not look down on it for its departure or initiation through onticity from everydayness, because again, it's a mode. It's where we all are. It's just how can you keep it up? Can you survive the inevitable trials
You never
that,
survive the discourse, but that's like the whole thing. You know what I mean? Like whenever you set out for, it's like you'll get what you wish for, but it won't be what you want. It won't be how you pictured it. You know
right?
what I'm
I mean,
saying?
yeah, it's why is it Salon or Ciron? I think it's Paul Salon who comes to visit Heidegger or something, and then Heidegger is like, "Yeah, this guy's not going to make it." That attitude uh, of we are in the night of metaphysics, and only a poet could survive, but not all of them. I mean, the bar is high. Uh, and Hilderlin is for him. I mean, everyone wants to claim him, but for him, Hilderlin is the wager. But I have some things about that we won't get into. But it's crucial at least because this will come up in the Lacan. Heidegger and resoluteness, that's like the challenge of surviving authentication, the step you make to authenticate yourself, to authenticate the Dasein. He's less grim in the being in time, but resoluteness is the name of that challenge. And then and that's horizontal and forward moving, or in some sense. But yeah, Kierkegaard is embarrassment. It is embarrassment. So he needs the mask, and the mask can communicate the embarrassment in an authentic way. Um, but the point of that communication is to resituate the subject at the in its need of dogmatic mediation, in its anxiety uh, for
To
to
suture the consciousness back to wholeness.
yeah
Yeah.
to find out what it is innocent of, in not to wish for innocence regained. I mean, he says that's not even real. That's not, if you talk about innocence regained, that's just another form of guilt. um but to think innocence at the level of its object without all of the machinations that are implied by simply saying I am guilty, which is why I said to when Anna was speaking, I said that total depravity, which is this Protestant notion, or at least becomes very centrally thematic, and loss of innocence, they're not quite the same thing. And because the loss of innocence requires this intermediary term in order to get to anything that would even resemble the reclamation of depravity as a motivation for pursuing holiness, purity, or whatever. You need anxiety to indicate something, but he tries to keep you in that mode of suspension, dramatic suspension. So Kierkegaard is in some ways maybe more like at least the depiction that Freud is putting up. But in other ways, you can see um, lots of reference that Heidegger makes. That, I mean, the distinction between fear and anxiety is obviously one. But yeah, but embarrassment and resolution, we should keep that difference in mind, because it will come up again in the Lacan. Okay.
Interesting.
I thought that this was good. We'll prepare for more bumpy rides in the future, and I'll try to keep us on task as much as humanly possible, but don't don't fear more detours. But we'll stay at least 60% on task. maybe 70%. All right, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
guys. Have a good
Thank
evening.
you.